Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Damn it. If the grandmother had heard such a dirty expression from the mouth of her pupil, she would have deprived her of sweets for a week and made her wash her mouth out with soap. But since Grandma was sound asleep at the late hour of 0 o'clock, Camille went unpunished, finally having stopped pacing her room. Exactly the beast of the cage called the garden. The young girl plumped down on the bed, complaining about the creaking, shell netted from the mushroom in a pile of plush John, and snuggled into his worn chocolate-colored fur. Silently she cried. How? But how could she have been so stupid? To fall so low? It wasn't her brain that obligingly suggested the flu, though. There's still time before the immediate fall, namely 21 o'clock 30 minutes. The exact time was suggested to her by the dial of the alarm clock, at which she cast a tear-stained glance. It was in that time frame that she was to report to the abominable. Impossible without a heart of the scoundrels. 2. It all happened 10 days ago. Camille was in the school library. She had just returned the books she had read and summoned the help of an elderly librarian who had been plagued by sciatica from the rainy weather. Samara had them shelved. Petty. There was a mocking voice over her shoulder and a school drill. Way rolled. Cooley turned around. Startled. Because of the height difference, she gave the owner of the voice with her nose somewhere in his chest. At armpit level. No, she said, abruptly, and through clenched teeth, she dropped her gaze. She looked bold and contemptuous. Stephen is the bully of the whole school, a bully and just the embodiment of all male vices. The distance between the boxes left no room for maneuvering. But Georgia, still out of the back, turned around, involuntarily slid sideways on his thigh, and standing on tiptoe, reached up. And just a little more and the book on the lives of the greatest ancient Greek philosophers would be in place. She decided that she would just ignore Stephen, not give him that pleasure. Grandmother, by the way, even in the mind forbade to swear, but granddaughter in the mind to do it to herself aloud. Because it was so, because life turned out to be so, that sometimes she felt emotion, and it was impossible to do anything about it. Camille repeated to herself that she did not care that he continued to stand. Behind him he must be squinting mockingly, blue eyes so piercing it seemed he could see right through you. A rustling sound was heard. Stephen apparently scratched the back of his blonde head. What unseemly habit! And then he suddenly intercepted the book from her, yanked it out of her hand, and slid it back onto the shelf himself. I didn't ask for it. Before she could finish, she choked on air, because he immediately grasped her shoulders firmly and turned her around to face him, literally typing her back into the shelf. I need to talk to you. I have nothing to talk about. Unexpectedly for herself, menacingly raised her voice and immediately remembered where she was, went to a whisper, leave me alone. That's how it is. After all you've done, it's no different than teasing. He lowered his voice too. By the way, you've caused me so much damage. You're a firing squad. Calling everyone up to the director. Losses. Who could even come up with trading answers for tests? Businessman, Stephen snorted. You're a dishonest man. You're a liar. You tell me you're not a gentleman. His hand suddenly moved from the girl's round shoulder to her thin, tall neck. His fingers ran along the edge of the snow-white legs, the collar, the decorated dress, as if to feel and outline the contour of the collarbone. Is that what it is about you? You seem to dress like a grandmother and act like one. What are you doing? The girl whispered. Her voice was quiet, barely audible. No longer out of habit of observing the rules of the library, but out of a strange numbness that spread through her body from the places Stephen touched. He grinned, but with only his lips. His eyes were cold. Nothing to do. He pulled away, took a step to the side. And so there was finally some distance between them, an obsession that had subsided. Nothing to do. Camille gasped for air. Stephen stood with his hands in the pockets of his jeans, on top of a t-shirt with some soccer club insignia and a black jacket. Dry, clearly 2 sizes too big. Despite his tall height of almost 190 centimeters, The guy was not very broad in the shoulders and was terribly self-conscious about it. But he kept it a secret, of course. Stephen was the storm of the school, elusive and yet a known bully in the neighborhood, but on his half. He was also a repeat offender with a history of being held back in 3rd, 6th, and 8th grades. It was hard to know what was the ugly truth about him and what was a scary rumor. But in any case, it would be hard to find a person more opposite in qualities and peculiarities noticeable at first sight in comparison with Sophia. And she, like him this spring, turned 18 years old at the very beginning of the season, when the first drop just appeared from the roof. Except that while Stephen looked all of 20, Camille was considerably younger than her age. The principal, the vice principal, handed out in the cafeteria, and some other people cringed at that. They loved to compare them. That's how unlike a schoolgirl is to her peers. Camille's grandmother, Emily, who for 10 years had also been her guardian after the death of her parents, who died in a car accident, and her only relative in the world, took care of her. Two people from very different eras inhabited the 3-bedroom Stalin apartment. In her working past, Emily taught history and literature. For almost 30 years, she had lived in the far north. Her pension was decent. She had enough to live on, as they call it. However, an outside observer could decide that the life of the grandmother and her granddaughter was peculiar, if not to say very strange. Camille received an exceptionally strict upbringing at home. Grandmother had no doubt that the modern world cannot trust a child. Overmullet, young, stupid creature will destroy the soul, morality, cripple, future. Emily herself kept to herself. She socialized only with a few worthy, in her opinion, people around her age. And if there was someone who had the audacity to say that she treated the child wrongly, that person received such an angry, logically constructed, and reasoned response that he himself was to blame, and in general shame on his head. And in time, the neighbors got used to it. After all, every family has its own rules. Everyone knows that. And since Emily's pupil was clean, clothed, and did not freeze, was always fed in winter, well behaved. Since Emily herself had a reputation for impeccability. For the last 50 years, then with time everyone calmed down, and even envied a little began to envy. After all, Emily had raised a granddaughter. So she's a golden girl, not at all like the modern kids of the family unit. Just a little lady, not a girl. Until 5th grade, Camille was homeschooled, and then she went to school and became a white crow. Teachers, though, praised her diligence and gave her A's. One day, I only got a C for my essay on how I spent my summer. In it, a 6th grader described how she had spent the whole summer reading works on world economics and the history of capitalism. The teacher said that it was very informative, but I would like to know about personal, so to speak, life, impressions, and adventures. Were there only books all summer? Camille then boldly replied that her grandmother has an Alex Schwartz acquaintance. He has an anniversary. He is 90 years old, and he just wrote those very books on the history of capitalism. That's why it was necessary to read them all. And then, based on the results, so to speak, to write a poem and give it to the Jubilee. Everything else is in the background of such an important matter. Selfishness and vanity. If Camille had said this one-on-one, the teacher might not have been angry. But the confrontation happened in front of the whole class. The class burst into laughter, and the teacher gave the girl a C. That C made the girl sick. She got so hysterical, she ended up fainting. We had to call an ambulance. Naturally, the teacher replaced it with a B out of harm's way. But Camille spent a long time pining and telling everyone that she was a loser, since her essays had only gotten a measly C. But it wasn't just the specifics of her studies that made her stand out. She dressed very originally. Naturally, her grandmother was in charge of her closet. It consisted of good new things, except that they were made according to the fashion of the 30s of the last century, and that they were clothes are not the most fashionable dressy styles in that era. Shoes were also selected the most modest. Flat shoes were not a brand. Classmates grew up, became teenagers, young girls. They learned to use cosmetics, went for manicures, had their hair done. Camille couldn't afford any of that. Not that she didn't want to. Sometimes she thought her grandmother was too strict. But then she remembered that Emily had a weak heart and that life in the modern world was not sugared just because of such loose morals. And any rudiments of Charlie's rebellious sentiments were just wheat, without water, the heat of summer. However, Camille was not one of those dunces who can only be transformed by a beauty parlor. By adulthood, the girl's figure has acquired feminine, soft, and lush in the right places outlines. She had a slightly elongated face with high sharks, straight nose, and wide sensual mouth. Gray eyes dazed, black fluffy lashes, long brown hair no one had ever seen. Tucked otherwise in one of 3 hairstyles, 2 braids on the sides, 1 braid in the back, or 1 braid arranged in a wreath around her head. Add to that refined manners, shyness, modesty, and a habit of keeping in the shadows of everything bright, noisy, flashy, and modern. And also the fact that almost all her interests and daily activities filter only through her grandmother's opinion of whether it is worthy, whether it is decent. And if some meticulously outside observer were to analyze Camille's exactly outlandish exotic mess, he would easily find in everything the reason why those around her perceived her as a strange person. That's putting it mildly. And only in exceptional cases, such as in clashes with Stephen, who for the past 2 years had increasingly made her the object of his attacks. Light, but offensively barbed. Only on rare occasions did her usual calmness come off, and she began not that she would never be boorish, but would reply sharply and defend herself vigorously. "So you have nothing to do," Camille repeated. "Then go and study, you asshole, or help out in class 3. Someone broke a window. It's blowing. The kids need help." Aha. You're fast. Stephen has his usual smile on his face. No, you're still acting like a grandmother and thinking the same thing. You know I've sorted out my problems, don't you? I'm not getting expelled. Thanks to Emily. She covered for me with our homeroom teacher. She realizes, if you give her the benefit of the doubt, that yes, Emily, she has 4 kids. She's a kind-hearted, fair person. You don't believe me. You want to bet on the test, and on Christopher will put 5, because his daddy brought her candy and something else. This guy was an incorrigible 2-timer, and no one in the class did not doubt that on the final test in math he will fail. Camille, of course, had heard of the couple, or rather, she had read about them. In some books, they were made by noblemen, and usually it didn't end well. There was no way she'd agree to some stupid bet. But today was not a good day at all. First thing in the morning, the grandmother thought her granddaughter had spritzed her granddaughter with cheap perfume. The girl swore that to grandmother's toilet stable did not go near, but she still made her go to the bathroom to wash off. Then it turned out that the grandmother just thought that in the closet there was a moth, so she put perfume in it. That's why Camille's clothes smelled. The grandmother didn't apologize, and her pupil felt unjustly offended. Then before school, she ran into a store to get tights. It was not a boutique, but a very modest youth clothing store. And this was where she and her grandmother sometimes came in when they needed to buy something that Emily had sewn but couldn't make at all. Usually it was something outerwear. This time one of the salesgirls didn't, as usual, just observe her from afar, but came up to her chest. The girl thought that she probably did so because her grandmother was not with her now, or she would never have dared to approach her. Grandma hated all sorts of consultants and knew how to drive them away quickly. The saleswoman talked about the fact that here our new products arrived. Youth clothes, very stylish denim skirts, and blouses beautiful. Camille glanced at it and turned away. No, even if she herself had been wearing what her grandmother sewed for 2 years now, there was no way she was going to upset her and dress differently. Pity the girl sighed behind the back of the sales clerk, sharing with a colleague. What kind of savagery is this? How will she live when her grandmother is gone? Will be lost with such an attitude. Generally not adapted to life. No, she'll be left without an apartment or all those who beckon and where only the neighbor's teachers look. It was hard, painful to hear that. And yet Camille couldn't help but recognize this woman as Evelyn. I saw the name on the counselor's name tags. She's got a point. It was really creepy to think about the time when she'd be alone. Grandma had been talking a lot lately about how she would soon be taken to heaven by her grandfather, and she, Camille, if she misbehaved, she would end her days on the panel. So to prevent that from happening, she must study hard, behave herself, and be a man of honor. What's the bet? Camille blurted out before she could even think about what she was doing. That's a different conversation. Stephen's voice had a sort of muzzled jubilant edge to it. Let's say if you're right, and Christopher fails, I get the money back that I won in the cleanup card. Camille nodded. That would be very good, just wonderful. Because Borka was a third grader, from a large family, and he'd lost everything he'd saved in pocket money for 6 months, and I'll sign up as a volunteer and go to the city park to plant trees. And I'm not gonna swear. Yeah, I'm in. Wait, he suddenly grabbed her wrist. You didn't even ask what you'd owe if you lost. And what do you want? She opened her eyes with her wrist. How did the burn not hurt? The grip was barely noticeable. It was some other strange perception of his closeness. You agreed to the bet, did you? But I did. You know, I don't really follow you. I don't have to. But I remember you said something in literature class about keeping your word, something about honor. I did. The girl exhaled and tensed, getting ready to pull her arm out, which means you keep your word. And if you lose, you'll come where I say and spend the night with me. Why the squeaky armor? Theoretically, the guy was very clear. Except in my brain. It's like an automatic system kicked in. From the logical decoding of this phrase to spend the night. Why should I come to you for the night? But do not pretend that completely stupid. You understand everything, he said simply. And then he let her go, winked, and disappeared, as if dissolved among the racks. GRU was not left standing, barely breathing. You look in front of you. Oh no. What's going to happen to her now? How could she? How dare he? The girl clapped heavily. Was Stephen not enough of the atrocities he was doing? Why is he with her? For what? Here. And where a librarian appeared in the aisle. Having instructed the polite girl to arrange the books, she lined up for a Michko to drink tea. Oh, why are you so pale? Have you put all the books away? What do you need on the list? Yes, everything, answered Camille. Her thoughts had wandered a long way from the library. Thank you. I don't need anything. And she left quite a bit. From the elderly librarian by the fact that she did not even say goodbye. And then the day of the test came. Christopher sat next to Camille, and she, gently peering, realized that he had not solved the problems and the essence of nonsense. Finally, everyone turned in their notebooks. Camille looked triumphantly at Stephen, who was sitting on the Kamchatka. She had no doubt that everything would be as it should be, that justice would prevail. He would lose, would he keep his word to her, would be forced to take the path of correction. Let him promise everything just to annoy her. But in the end, it will all come back to him in a positive way. It will. I mean, it can't be any other way. And then we learned that Christopher got an A, and that's when I really wanted to go under. Stephen found her, or rather caught her just outside the school gates, just grew in front of her, so she bumped into him again. Hello. Hello, said the girl and lowered her head to the moon. What are we sad about? That it's not nice to lose, but it had to happen sometime. You can't live your whole life so right and perfect. You judge yourself. Step to the side. She tried to go around, but he wouldn't let her. So let's not get into any of your notions. Okay, we had a bet. Now you have to do what we agreed. You know, it's kind of funny, actually. If I were you, I'd be anybody else. I'm sure another girl could send me far and wide. But you're not like that. You gave your word, so here you go. He held out a piece of paper. My father had a cottage in the suburbs. There's no one there now. I'm coming on Saturday night. You're not going to cry. Don't worry, I won't touch you. We'll have a great time. I'll buy you a barbecue. Camille opened her mouth to say that she couldn't come anywhere, because how could she possibly explain her grandmother's absence at night? She didn't even have any girlfriends she could theoretically spend the night with. But she didn't say anything, just bowed her head sluggishly again and wandered home. Stephen left the walls of the school with an ambivalent feeling. On the one hand, he had managed to achieve today what seemed to him to be unrealistic. On the other hand, he felt as if he had gotten dirty in something nasty and filthy. Camille was not like other girls, and for more than 1 year had been for him only an object of interested mocking observation. But then he began to notice things that the others did not see. How good she was always straight back haughtily, but not haughtily. And what a right word for her aristocratic head planting. This girl never gossiped about others, never brought a cheat sheet. It was clear that she didn't live an easy life, but no one heard her complain. She seemed to exist in her own closed, like a soap bubble world. At recess, she'd duck into a book and just go blank. And then one day she's walking by and notices Stephen's in a bad mood. And she threw something like, "No offense," she wouldn't understand. This phrase referred to a conversation Stephen had had about 10 minutes before with his geography teacher, who had reprimanded him in a scathing, yes, personal way, for not done homework, and did not want to listen to the fact that there was simply no time for it, because in the apartment at Stephen started renovation in the bathroom, and he could not refuse to help. In general, she always scolded her students harshly for everything. After her husband's salary, because as rumor had it, the lion's share of this salary he took away to his mistress. So she found someone to vent her anger on, and it was this statement of Camille Stephen that caught her. He did not ask for pity, and no one dared to tell him what to think and feel. He tried hitting her breasts in response, with taunts, but it had all been bypassed. He began to watch her more, and he himself didn't realize how it had turned into an obsession. Yes, that word seemed quite true to him. And Stephen didn't want to do anything about it. Why? After all, she, apparently, like so many other people, already had a certain idea of him. So why disappoint her? Even if he never had a chance to win her favor in kind. Well, so be it. But he'll get his. Camille was welcomed home. Familiar, adored Smell's grandmother boiled for a late lunch. Chicken noodle soup and fried pies of broken dough with black caviar. But before sitting down at the table at the very doorstep, Grandma questioned Camille about the grade her test was given at school. Only when she was satisfied with the answer did she tell her to fan out and wash her hands. Then they sat down to watch some old Musketeers movie on TV. Then Grandma, even though it was already 8:00 p.m., took the crystal out of the closet. "I didn't have time to get through the morning. But it's necessary to do nothing at least in the evening. Hands from labor will not fall off," she said, giving the pupil an apron without on the couch, which was not avoided by any homework. Then Emily went to bed. Camille found herself left to herself. On the dial, the hands were getting close to midnight, inexorably approaching the coming of Saturday. She drew in a gasp of air and threw herself on the bed, closing her eyes. What was she to do? To break his word can be, of course, but hardly for such unfortunate behavior. She will immediately catch karma boomerang. That is, the well-deserved retribution from fate that her grandmother is so fond of talking about. And for some reason, Camille couldn't imagine what it would be like to exist afterwards. Not to mention that this very thing she'd signed up for menacingly, sat up abruptly on the bed, then paced the room. Then a curse burst from her lips. Camille was more and more inclined to tell her grandmother everything and let her scold, let her punish. But then there would be a chance to make up her mind. What to do now? Grandma won't leave away. We'll say that, of course, there can only be a negative answer here. Granddaughter. The voice of an old woman in the corridor sounded. The girl flinched. Why is Grandma awake? She can't read minds. I think, granddaughter. Emily spoke in a hoarse voice. Granddaughter, repeated Emily in a hoarse, weak voice of the heart that she ceased call soon. The ambulance arrived on time. The doctor said it looked very much like an approaching heart attack and hospitalization was necessary. Camille was thrashing around, gathering the things she would need at the hospital as instructed by her grandmother. Emily was taken away. Camille returned to the apartment, locked the front door, sank down on the hallway banquette, and covered her face with her hands and sobbed. What a nightmare everything was turning out to be, just a black streak. And at the same time, it was impossible not to recognize that this misfortune allows her to carry out her plans. After all, the grandmother will spend a few days in the hospital, which means that the fact that the granddaughter did not spend the night at home will not become known to her. Frivolous books, erotic movies. This was not on the cultural and educational menu that the grandmother had prepared for Camille. Naturally, the young girl had some knowledge of the relationship between the sexes, and the school program introduced her to the fact that children are not found in cabbage. And yet the girl realized that if she thought about the fact that she had a little more to do, she would simply lose her feelings. Theoretically, of course, in this, there was a plus date canceled. But there was also a downside. She would essentially be betraying her habit of being an honest person. Like today, you lied about being sick of the cutlet, and then you threw them away. My grandmother once reprimanded her, and for some reason that incident was particularly sharp in George's memory. And tomorrow the grandmother narrowed her eyebrows and slapped the very missing cutlets in front of the pupil. Are you going to steal? Or will you run over a man with a car? Yes, on a green light. Grandma, forgive me, please. Choking on tears, asked little Camille, you will not make me finish them. They were in the garbage pails. How smart are you? Emily stroked the girl's head and then grabbed her ear and pulled her from the table. Take them out and give them to the stray cats that live in the basement. Put your hand straight up and throw it down. Grandma, from fear, the girl even stopped crying. We do not have cats living under the house. Only the rats are there. I don't want to. Too late, dear, grinned the old woman. You have to take responsibility for your actions. And if a rat bites your fingers, she said, touching each of the 5 fingers on her granddaughter's left hand, it's your own fault. I'm a sweetheart. I'm ready to love all kinds of you. Even if you were crooked in the face, even if you got D's in school. But if I knew you were lying, I'll know you don't keep your word. You're gonna lie to me one more time. That's how you're gonna get me in the coffin. You won't have a grandmother anymore. You'll go to an orphanage. I'll live off you. After that, 10-year-old Camille realized that she would always be an honest person and would not break her word. To go and give herself into the hands of a monster in human form. Camille chose her weekend most dressy dress, snow-white Richelieu fabric, skirt, sun and sleeves, wings. She blocked her hair with a dark green ribbon over the dress, a light green shade, the young green foliage of cashmere. She decided not to think about what would happen until it happened. She decided to take things one step at a time. Gather herself and check that all electrical appliances were off. Leave the apartment and from her home at the bus stop. Take a bus to the station where the commuter trains leave from. Get off the light version of the train. And she was a little confused, but she was given directions. It was to walk across a field. It wasn't scary. There were other people walking there. Some merry company, a grandmother, a vegetable gardener. They were singing songs, and suddenly a strong young voice broke into their old chorus. The grandmother shared with an extraordinary companion, who was so young knew the words of an ancient Schlager, but immediately sang again. And so the whole company reached the dacha community. It was separated from a small village with the funny name of Jersey Pole, where in the old days they used to graze giant herds of cows, and now rare cattle kept by the locals. And a little farther to the south, the village and dachas were described by the river. In the heat of the summer months, it dries up almost to the bottom. Who are you, sweetheart? Asked one of the old ladies. Yes, that one staggered off. Acquaintances asked to get something, and she waved her hand in the direction of generally towards the forest, not houses. Well, happily ever after, the old lady said. Figured the girl didn't want to talk about herself. That's fine. Stephen's cottage turned out to be, and indeed, almost by the forest, stood on the very edge of the community, and it looked pretty abandoned. Camille looks like that. What a place to pick for a date. He couldn't ask her home either. She knew he didn't live alone. He was being raised by some distant relative. After Stephen's father was imprisoned for another theft a few years ago, Camille also knew that the boy's father had passed away last year. Then she sympathized with him and even tried to get close to him, to comfort him somehow. A man's grief. Maybe he realized her attention then. Wrong. He was imagining things. By evening, it was noticeably colder, and the girl chose her clothes according to the weather lunchtime, still sunny and warm. But now it turned out not to matter at all. The fact that the body crept shivering. What was frightening was something else entirely. Finally, it was on the porch and knocked on the door. "Hello," he said, and a look of amazement flashed across his face, as if he was sure she wasn't coming. "Hi," she said, and thought that awkward mutual greetings like this were becoming a habit. And the group didn't want to make any habits with this guy. "Come in." He stepped aside, letting her into the house. The girl froze slowly, as if there was something nightmarish waiting for her beyond the threshold. However, that was essentially what it was. Inside, the house was just as she had expected it to be. It was in need of repair and cleaning. The furniture had been brought in on the principle that it was worthless. The floors were painted a luscious orange. Camille remembered that the same floors had been in her grandmother's village house. She'd only been there a few times, and then Granny had sold it. She didn't have the energy to travel to keep everything in order, and it was too far away to be used as a summer house. But the main reason for getting rid of the ancestral nest was that she needed money for her Camille nurturing. That's the word nurturing Grandma used. By the way, when she wanted to reproach her granddaughter, say, "I spend so much effort, you nurture, and you still manage to just shrink in winter, tear a new dress for walks, refuse to drink fish oil for immunity, do not remove. You put toys." The list of reasons for reproaches was endless, and only having grown up, or rather in 15 years, Camille began to think about the fact that not everything was her fault. Just sometimes her grandmother needed a fight, and the person with whom it could be done at will. She was the only one who could do it. "So, do you want a drink?" Stephen threw awkwardly as he led the girl into the back of the house. "I don't drink." She dropped it and rolled on him warily. "No, I don't. I'm already aware of that. I'm asking about tea. No coffee. No, I'm not asking for that. And you can." And Nastya got the purse handles first, so we switched knuckles. "I know I lost the bet, and I keep my word. I'm ready, but can you hurry it up?" The last word she threw at him angrily, determined to cross the distance between them. She stood close again, and he could almost feel her breath. So Stephen stared, dumbfounded. "I realize I have..." The floors were painted a luscious orange. Camille remembered that the same floors had been in her grandmother's village house. She'd only been there a few times, and then Granny had sold it. She didn't have the energy to travel to keep everything in order, and it was too far away to be used as a summer house. But the main reason for getting rid of the ancestral nest was that she needed money for her Camille nurturing. That's the word nurturing Grandma used. By the way, when she wanted to reproach her granddaughter, say, "I spend so much effort, you nurture, and you still manage to just shrink in winter, tear a new dress for walks, refuse to drink fish oil for immunity, do not remove. You put toys." The list of reasons for reproaches was endless, and only having grown up, or rather in 15 years, Camille began to think about the fact that not everything was her fault. Just sometimes her grandmother needed a fight, and the person with whom it could be done at will. She was the only one who could do it. "So, do you want a drink?" Stephen threw awkwardly as he led the girl into the back of the house. "I don't drink." She dropped it and rolled on him warily. "No, I don't. I'm already aware of that. I'm asking about tea. No coffee. No, I'm not asking for that. And you can. And Nastya got the purse handles first, so we switched knuckles. I know I lost the bet, and I keep my word. I'm ready, but can you hurry it up? The last word she threw at him angrily, determined to cross the distance between them. She stood close again, and he could almost feel her breath. So Stephen stared, dumbfounded. I realize I have quite a reputation, but why were you pouncing on me? What was the courtesan used to call these girls of such behavior? You see, it turns out we can speak the same language, and he smirked. Okay, that was an unfortunate comparison. I'm sorry, but what do you think? I jumped on you like a barbarian right here on the doorstep, threatening you without answering anything. Stephen sighed strangely and stepped back, shoving his hands into the pockets of his jeans. It was gloomy in this part of the cottage. The light poured in from the open door on the right, and there were two of them. The long hallway was junked. The living room was junked, or rather the living room was junked, because in principle there could not be a living room in the cottage. Thank you, she said quietly. So it's unlikely he heard. You know, I'm really surprised you came just to do a word of honor. It's kind of old-fashioned these days. I can't do otherwise, I shrugged, sitting down at the table. And if I were to argue something similar, like stealing something, it would never happen. Camille said smugly. Aha, so it's still within your moral framework. A teapot and a couple of cups were placed on the table. All three items clearly belonged to different services. That's not what I meant to say, the girl muttered. You cheated at all, caught me giving my word before I knew the terms. When he filled the cup, she put her palms around it. Though it was scary, hot, her body desperately needed to finally get a dose of warmth. Okay, I give up. I'm a scoundrel and a molester. But the end justified the means. He smiled and sat down next to me. There's nothing for tea, she asked timidly, suddenly realizing that her stomach protests against the empty drink, and lunch and dinner for nervous thoughts, the ground as it was missed. There were chips and a chocolate bar, but I ate them while I was waiting for you. And the euros. Here's half a chocolate bar. He put the candy on the table. I see. For a while there was silence in the kitchen, where a lone light bulb shone, apart from the sounds of tea drinking. What was that? Was Camille suddenly alert? I didn't hear anything, Stephen said nonchalantly. Did I hear something that made you think there was someone else in the house? The girl went cold. No, you're lying. I'm not lying. There's no one here. The boy nodded at the doorway. Beside him, a puppy, a well-fed little thing that looked like a street Bernard sheepdog, peered into the room. He wiggled his nose funny and shook his paw. The first out of lively young curiosity. The second, because the paw was occupied by a screw. Oh, he's so cute. Camille flew off her chair and was at the puppy's side in a flash. Grandma's strict upbringing included, among other rules, one that said no animals in my house, no dogs in the street. They'll chew them up. They'll freeze. Lock-a-me. The puppy was taken aside, but then attracted by the fact that the stranger was wearing a master-smelling sweater, pitched forward. Where'd he come from? When I was on my way here, he came after me at the station. He must have hurt his paw in the street. I swallowed a little. You'll keep him, or else. I have the right now. Unhappily, Stephen grinned. He'll live at the dacha for now, of course. When I leave here on weekdays, so he'll stay with the neighbors. I've already made arrangements, and then I'll take it all to myself. I've decided to rent an apartment. I'm looking for options to bring him back to where I live now. I can't just throw him out on the street. Stephen whistled, calling the dog, but the girl didn't let him make a move. Picked him up in her arms, went back to the table, slightly pulled out a chair, sat down, and placed the puppy on her lap. Bilek stated a fact already known to the boy. Pretty as he was, he also reached out to pet him, and their fingers met in a thick laugh. And the laughter must have stayed on the train, because both of them felt a pang, a strange pulling sensation. Camille froze, eyes wide open, watching the guy's face grow closer. "How beautiful are you?" he whispered. The next moment their lips made contact. About the flu, I had read about the miracle of the first kiss. But she wasn't thinking yet how it could be hers, much less envisioning that it could be so dizzying. Like being dropped into the sky with this guy. And while the kiss lasted, she forgot all about the unhappiness with her grandmother, about the fact that he'd forced her into a terrible moral downfall, that she was entirely at his mercy. The kiss was interrupted for a trivial reason, and they realized they needed a breath of air. Immediately, the magic of the first intimacy vanished. Camille's hazy gaze was a dream. And now, instead of sweet tenderness, it read disgust and contempt. And Stephen in response immediately looked haughtily mockingly, so looks the winner on the coveted trophy, which has already managed to touch. And now the moment of total possession is at hand. "I hate it." The voice didn't waver. The puppy, as if sensing the mood of people, jumped from her lap. Master of the place informed him master and dog kneeled. Somewhere in the hallway, stupid name Camille was now ready to say anything to hurt him. Other more graceful and sturdy expressions. She was still going through her mind. "Didn't ask you," risked the guy, rising from the table. She shuffled out of her chair upward, weighed down, and did what all sorts of wilderness survival instructors advise against doing under any circumstances. Turned to the top predator in the house behind her back one moment, and he put his arms around her, turning her to face him. Or rather, pulled her to him, so that the fragile girl's hands pressed against his chest. The forces were, of course, unequal, and he in an instant broke her resistance in the loins. The girl was jabbed from the edge of the steel, and she wrinkled her nose, which he interpreted to his own understanding. "A girl like you would never mess with someone like me. But still, you think I'd pass up a chance to at least give you a good kiss? Not a chance in hell." She was about to tell him everything she thought of him and his heartless wager, but only exhaled, clenched her eyes convulsively, realizing she was going to kiss again, and immediately opened her eyes. Hearing glass break somewhere nearby, Stephen heard it too, let go so sharply that Camille staggered. It was only because she clutched her fingers to the table to the point of pain that she did not fall that he cut the question short, pressing his finger to her lips. The girl was pierced with fear. It wasn't even a misunderstanding that something wrong was happening, but a pure underlying feeling. What might be called primitive intuition, for centuries guarding man from trouble. "Is there someone in the house?" whispered Stephen, and extinguished the light in the kitchen quietly. Now they heard together in the far room of what was on the other side of the living room, the hallway. Someone was treading heavily. More than one person, it seemed. "Damn it." Stephen sagged, and Camille glanced at him, wondering how, however, they could express themselves so similarly. The occasions, of course, were quite different. "Thieves are thieves," for the girl whispered. "That one has nothing to take, and usually climbs up to the cottages in winter," answered Stephen. And though it was almost dark, only the light of the moon slipped sparingly through the window. The girl could have sworn that he turned pale. "Gotta get away. Must be summoned," she said. "The telephone in that room," he muttered through his teeth and turned to her. "It's yours." Camille quietly took her purse from the table. "I opened it. I forgot it at home." Stephen waved his hand, whether to mean okay or not. "What an idiot. Go on. Get out. Call the neighbors from them." "And you asked the girl?" The young men were already in the front of the house, and those who had entered it in the middle of the night, judging from the sounds, moved from a room that could be called a bedroom. Beyond the door, a narrow bed was visible. There was a covered veranda adjoining it, and also playing the part of a huge closet. All this Stephen appraised briskly, pondering what to do next. The door to the second room was still open when Camille entered the cottage, and apparently the puppy had gone out of there. And it had even returned. "I'll get the master and come out too," the boy replied. "No, you can't do that." With an unconscious gesture, she grabbed his arm and pulled him. "Go already, fool." Shook her off him, and "Go already." Saying this, Stephen disappeared into the gloom of the room. Camille clasped his hands together. He is right. She should run and call for help. Why should she get in the way? After all, she hadn't come here of her own free will. And Stephen is not a good man at all. The girl went to the front door, opened it. Luckily, it didn't creak. It was brighter outside than in the house, and already from the porch you could see the warm light, the lights in the houses of neighbors. But at that moment there was a scream behind her. Camille rushed back and again, as if not realizing what she was doing, grabbed something from the stack of boxes, apparently prepared for taking out the change. Something heavy but comfortably lodged in the cramped palm of her hand approached the doorway. Grimly, she cautiously peered inside, and only by an incredible effort restrained herself from shrieking. Stephen was lying on the floor, with some scrawny type bent over him. His long arms frantically groped the guy, as if the legs of a giant spider made to taste his prey. "What is it?" A second type raised his voice. He was not visible at once, for he was standing at the other end of the room at the exit to the veranda. "Nothing," answered arm's length hoarsely, curled into a cough. "I guess Mio fooled us." "No way." The second type swayed. And Camille, continuing her observation, it seemed that they were both drunk. "It's got to be. The kid knows something for sure, but he's being sea-linged. What do you want to knit with?" "Hold on. I'll look." Camille backed up so she was hidden by the wall. She didn't plan. She didn't wonder how big her chances were. She had almost ceased to realize herself, and there was only one aspiration left. One decision: she can't leave here. That's the way with these villains. The girl could almost physically feel the threat coming from them. They were apparently looking for something, but that was unimportant. The moment the arm-length, chain-linked man stepped into the antechamber of the living room, a cast-iron skillet fell upon him. The blow struck him squarely on the head, and most of the weight of the cast-iron utensil fell upon his shoulder. The stranger howled, then grunted and collapsed senseless. Camille, before anything else could react, Sama rushed into the room and just threw the skillet forward at random. She was lucky. Those who had entered the house had not expected to find anyone other than the boy son of their longtime debtor. So they were confused, but the second guy managed to dodge. He darted into the veranda. Frightened by the attack, he did not rush to the aid of his accomplice, because he did not know who else was here. Stephen moved and began to rise. Stephen ran. The girl rushed to him and suddenly jerked upward hard, helping him up. "I told you." The boy dropped his tongue behind his flying tongue and grimaced with pain. The blow of the bandit who had attacked earlier came in the jaw, and judging by the sensations, now it was impossible to do without a visit to the dentist. The villain, who opened on the veranda, had a flashlight with him. Its beam snatched the young men, and they turned around in sync. Accurately caught in the forest clearing by the light of the headlights, young Alyosha, "Ah," you foully swore and spat through his teeth, a man in the characteristic clothes of a prisoner. "The girl is still light. Where are you standing?" "Let's run, Camille. It's the end of you." And the convict took out from his belt something that glinted in the cold light of the moon like steel. They were separated by a few meters, 3 or 4 meters. Stephen came to his senses, and together with the girl, rushed to the exit of the room. He was not a coward, but he was not a fool to stay heroically in the house and engage in hand-to-hand combat. The puppy was yapping at his master's feet. He wasn't a coward either, but he was too young. And when they got into the house, he was just too scared. He scrambled under the one who cried his own way. And now, with 2 good acquaintances around at once, he took the risk of getting out. Camille took an extra couple of seconds to bend down and pick up the mala. "How you round your eyes?" Stephen, when they stepped over, or rather jumped over the louse on the floor of the convict. Such a thing he had not expected from his unwilling guest. But all questions could wait. Without collusion, and without wasting any more breath on superfluous words, young people with a puppy under their arm rushed out of the house and dashed across the lot to a neighbor's dacha. They didn't even turn around to see if they were being chased in. Ran out onto the porch for the door drums. Help. Call the police. Help. The events that followed merged into several long. Later we recall them as if through the fog of a clock. Alarmed neighbors came to the rescue. And soon those who had broken into Stephen's father's cottage in the middle of the night were captured. They were indeed, as Camille had immediately thought, escaped convicts. An ambulance and a doctor also arrived. After examining Stephen, he said that, in principle, it was nothing serious. The jaw was not broken. And that's the main thing. Young lady, you don't risk it anymore. The doctor turned to Camille alone on such a big guy with a frying pan. Dashing. But what if you'd missed? I can't imagine. What else was I supposed to do? Now that it was over, Camille couldn't stop shivering, even though she was drinking the second mug of scalding hot tea. And 2 woolen plaids, given out by surly, unworthy neighbors, were thrown on her shoulders at once. Stephen disobeyed and looked out still into the street, just when the very convict who attacked him biked to the police car. Too bad he had no time to fight back. Stephen spat on the ground and threatened the man with his fist. He swore at the police. Walking with his feet, he rushed into the fight again. But naturally, no one let him. Stephen heard a couple more nasty things about himself and his father. It's all clear, he muttered. He went back into the house and sat down at the table, leaning over his cup. Then he explained to Camille who it was. It turned out that 2 prisoners had escaped from the very colony where Stephen's father and his cottage were located. They didn't choose it at random. He liked to lie all his life, Stephen said. One could sense that he was both eager to speak out and uncomfortable with his own need for candor. And Georgia also noticed for the umpteenth time that Stephen calls his father he. But in principle, such an oddity was already familiar since the boy's parent went to the colony 4 years ago. Stephen almost never said either father or John. And here he lied, thinking it would add to his influence in the zone. Bitter. The young man grinned. He didn't keep quiet while he was still at home. He lied that there was gold buried in the dacha, which he stole back in the 90s. You can imagine, Stephen usually spoke about his father without emotion. But now, apparently, against the background of the experience, his intonation was combined with indignation. He lied to my little boy that there was gold in the garden. And I wasn't even then. I used to take a shovel and dig joyfully from fence to fence, from where I took strength. And he was laughing. So there's no gold? Camille asked. No, of course not. Yes, everyone was looking for it with metal detectors. About 10 years ago, they rented the summer house to some students. They heard all this nonsense and started to turn the place upside down, looking for it. And there was never any gold. It's that simple. He just couldn't accept that he was no longer the big bandit everyone feared, which he had once lost at cards. Mom left us back then. That's probably why he went completely off the rails. So he created the illusion that he had money. It's just not time to take it yet. What a bastard. Stephen raised his voice. Even before he died, he had time to shoot the whole psycho out there. How do I know that no one else will come here to this El Dorado on the outskirts? I'm fed up. I'm leaving. How are you leaving? Camille was confused. It was none of her business. And if she had the opportunity to go away and never see Stephen again in her life. But a little earlier, before this attack had happened, she would have gladly taken it, and would even have given much for such a gift of fate. But now she could not explain it to herself. She didn't want to get into the intricacies of her feelings, but she just suddenly realized that she cared about Stephen. It was discouraging, made her feel like a bad and spoiled girl. But Camille couldn't change that, even if she really wanted to. And you'll pass your exams. Stephen stretched out his hand and snapped his fingers in front of her nose. Wake up. What exams? What will this school give me? What about getting into the institute? She whispered. Woolen plaids. Would they slip off my shoulders? But the girl didn't even notice, declaring them cool. Aha, an institute like me is lost. Nothing in life is ours for the taking. Stephen averted his eyes. No, you're not missing. You don't have to be. It's not like you have to be like your father or that you have to live your whole life miserable. You can be anything you want to be. Now Camille's voice sounded firm and determined, as if she had to speak to a large audience, such as her own class, and she had something very important to tell them. What do you know about me? Stephen said this in his usual mockingly arrogant tone, but in his eyes he read a different kind of loneliness and lostness, as if he were suddenly alone in the world. Camille knew, in fact, that he was. She could have sworn that this guy didn't have any really close friends, the kind you trust like yourself, the kind who wouldn't let you go to waste. And then a thought struck like lightning. She does. A grandmother is different. A family member. She replaced mom and dad. But it's still different, and she has no friends of her own. Are you right? She answered. And I know the rumors, and what you said yourself. And that's not much. It doesn't have to be more than that. Stephen rose abruptly from the table. Shall we? Can I call you a cab home? And what else? Robert, neighbor and owner of the cottage, intervened in the conversation. He wasn't eavesdropping on the conversation. It's just that he had his own business with Sprouts and in the next room, and he happened to overhear a lot of things. Robert had known Stephen for 3 years, that is, exactly since he had bought the plot. At first he had thought Stephen was a guy, and a felon without 5 minutes. That was how the distant relative of the young man, who had become his guardian, had put it. But then Robert changed his mind. If only because no one in the cottage community and the surrounding villages could not recall any bad deeds in which Stephen was involved. If only because this kid had been seen doing good deeds here and there. He'd helped fix up one grandmother's cattle shed. In the village, he helped to find lost cats of some townspeople who came to the country house for summer vacations. He participated in clearing the pond of all kinds of garbage, and even once tamed a local gang of hooligans when they started molesting the girls' daughters of the owners of the lost cat. All in all, Stephen, in Robert's opinion, was a great guy. He didn't really understand what Camille had to do with him, and decided that she must be his girlfriend. Romantic interest, so to speak. Let's have a show. These seats are enough betting. I'll give you all kinds of stuff. 2 seats. Now we'll arrange the youth. We'll have tea in the morning. Robert waved his hand. And then I'll give you both a ride to the station. It's a deal. Camille and Stephen nodded in agreement. That's how it was done. Glushenko. Finally, you're back. Rushed to the girl, looked out of the apartment across the street. Neighbor. Good afternoon, Jenna. The girl smiled politely. Yes, I slept over at a friend's place. She had already prepared a lie about the fact that this friend had a small child, and she had to go to the night shift. And her husband, too. And that's until she gets the schedules just right. Looking for friends who will sit with the baby. But the next words of her neighbor almost made Camille faint. I got a call. I know your grandmother well. Jenna spoke quickly. The hospital called. They couldn't reach you. Oh, what a grief. She was in good health, wasn't she? What? What's wrong with Grandma? Camille was leaning against the wall in the driveway. I got the call. So the neighbor was in no hurry to get to the point. Anyway, Emily took a sudden turn for the worse during the night. The doctors were frantic. Oh, what a grief. You're all alone. The neighbor, the grandmother, stretched out. Grandma, she's dead. Camille's hand went to her neck. How hard is it to breathe? It felt like the sky was going to collapse on my head. Isn't it ridiculous just like that? Was she far away from her grandmother in her last hour? No. Why would you think that? Ooh, spit it out. The neighbor waved her hands. Don't you listen to me at all. What am I telling you? You're a fool. I said you're the only one left since Grandma went to the hospital. It must be hard for you to be alone. Anyway, by morning, she was feeling better. And I got another call. To say they'd never seen a patient recover so quickly. They said she'd be home in a week. Oh, why are you so pale? It's not even alive, Jenna. The girl shook her head and turned away, and began to jingle her keys, opening the door of her apartment. "You can't talk at all. The whole neighborhood doesn't like you for it." And she went into her apartment and slammed the door rudely, without even saying goodbye to her neighbor. Jenna stood there with her mouth open. Camille had never allowed herself anything like that before. "However," said the neighbor, and then, remembering that she had put in the queen chicken for soup, yes, put the fire on high. Ouch, poked and ran away to her room. Grandma was indeed soon discharged home, and the life of the small Camille family quickly returned to the usual course. But then it became clear that something was changing. Camille often thought of Stephen. They hadn't seen each other since they had parted at the station. The boy said he'd take the next train. In the meantime, he wanted to walk a little longer and think about everything. Sometimes, walking down the street, caught herself looking for him with her eyes. Why? She couldn't explain it clearly to herself. But she remembered what he had said at the station. Before the train started, he'd said he was very sorry for her and apologized for the idiotic bet. "I thought I'd feel better if I got you." It only made it worse. He didn't explain anything else, just disappeared. Camille once thought maybe she could find him herself, just go to his house. Maybe he hadn't moved out of his family's apartment yet, but every time he pulled himself away from such pointless stupidity. Then, as the train pulled away from Camille, Stephen gave her a look, then tugged the puppy's leash lightly. Went for a walk. He really had a lot to think about. Time after time he replayed the events of the previous evening, but not until the strangers broke into the house. When Georgia was still to come, Stephen could not find a place for himself. With his mind, he knew that he could triumph and get literally anything he wanted from her, except that his own recent impudence somehow began to seem like an unworthy dirty deed. And imagining what would happen when the girl crossed the threshold of the cottage, Stephen somehow could not in his own fantasies commit anything obscene. The most he imagined was a kiss. And this indecision, some silly modesty, only irritated him more. Then he belatedly also thought about the fact that, as promised then in the library, can tomorrow theoretically treat kebabs. Pork and marinade were standing in the fridge, but nothing. Now for evening tea, there's no such thing. It turned out quite invited the girl of his dreams cannot accept. The dog pulled sharply on the leash, thereby pulling Stephen out of his thoughts. "Ah, no," said the boy. "There's some geese grazing out there. Let's not go hunting them. Let's go in the grass over there. You little dog. It'll be like a jungle for you. Let's play." But even fun with Stephen's pet couldn't stop the thoughts from flowing. Only now they took a different direction. He suddenly remembered how many times his father had grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and, giving not fresh breath, said that they were of the same breed and that Stephen's destiny was to be a thief, a bandit, and that at 6, at 8, at 10 he had hated his father like that, fought him off, shouted that he would never do such abominations as he did, and his father would get furious and threaten to teach his son reason. And then, growing up, Stephen began to realize that many people were not ready to listen to him about what he was like on his own. It turned out that many people perceived him as the son of the very thief John from some house. Stephen faced the fact that children were forbidden to play with him. He was looked down upon in the local stores, as if he was 12 years old and all he could think about was stealing. Distrust, contempt. Stephen responded to all of this with muffled resentment. And then other feelings came in. Stephen became hostile to the world. He did not want to be like his father, but he also realized that he was too often seen as a creature in John's shadow, as an extension of him. Stephen grew up a disobedient child. He realized early on that he didn't need to ask about his mother. It was enough for him to have one frank conversation with his father, who told him that she had left him for a new family, where the husband was all right and rich, and where other normal children had already been born. That was enough for Stephen to realize that his mother was gone, as if he was a half-orphan with a living parent. And then it happened that Stephen found an understanding with a group of guys who were considered the main bullies in the neighborhood. Somehow they got together, and it beckoned to him that these guys didn't suspect him of evil. They didn't bully him. Yes, they were not the ideal of virtue, real hooligans, but society with them beckoned. So he couldn't resist. Stephen, however, kept a little apart and did not participate in many of their scandalous antics. He was 16 when the leader of this kid gang said that they were not ready to be with them in everything. They don't need a man for one thing. Stephen stepped aside. Except the rumors about what a scumbag he was didn't go anywhere. They grew like mountain grass, and now he couldn't, and he didn't want to fight them. In fact, he decided it was probably better that they'd be more afraid of him, less likely to hurt him. And for a while it seemed normal to exist like that. But now Stephen wasn't so sure anymore. He was sickened to think that he had no other way but to follow the stereotypes around him. It was to the point of impossibility. Strangely enough, it was since he had started to get closer to Nina that he had been having these thoughts much more often. And after the events of that night, Stephen suddenly realized clearly he really could make his life anything he wanted it to be. It is only necessary to decide and quickly and definitively change everything. Despite the fact that final exams were approaching and free time had shrunk to the value of 0, Camille found a way to get a part-time job on Sundays. It was a lowly occupation handing out handbills to passers-by on the street, and it paid very little. But it was the very first money earned in the life of a young girl. After calculating the income for 2 weekends, Camille made a difficult decision. How scary was it? But it was too late to back out. It seemed to her that she was on her way to fulfillment. She was drawn by some unknown force that was impossible to resist. The first thing Camille did was to go to the pastry shop and choose a cake, a very small 1/2 kilo. But as the saleswoman assured her, it was homemade and delicious. It was a honey cake with a black currant layer. And then she walked into the mall to a familiar clothing store. Camille stopped with a frantic drinking heart at the racks, above which appealing plastic letters folded into discount words. "Can I help you with something?" Camille flinched as the girl counselor approached her. It was the slightly familiar Evelyn. For the first time in her life, Georgia felt so keenly that she looked wonderful. In an old-fashioned dress below the knee, she looked like a scarecrow to herself. "And I'd like to try this on," she said and pulled the shoulders of the dress. It was a smoke, someone's gray knee-high dress made of knit fabric with a couple of pockets. In front of it, Camille picked it out because it cost $49, and she had exactly $20 left after buying the cake. The consultant looked then at the dress, which was on unusual clientele, then at the dress, then at the shoulders. "You'll excuse me, but may I offer some advice?" She smiled timidly. "We have these leftovers from the last collection." And here, stepping back a step, she pointed to 4 mannequins who showed brightly colored sundresses made of cotton with flowers. "Accepted new collection. We just haven't had time to put these models on sale yet. If you want, I'll bring your size now." The counselor was very friendly. "One moment, please." Camille had no time to say not to worry, but the consultant disappeared and then reappeared. She was carrying 4 sundresses in different colors and in 2 sizes each. And right now, Camille simply did not have the strength to refuse. As soon as these marvelous outfits were in her hands, it was as if a witch's spell had fallen on the girl. As a result, she came out of the examples, clutching a sundress with large flowers of 4 shades to her chest. "A lovely choice that suits you very well," continued to Count Evelyn, who immediately escorted just glowing with happiness customer to the oblique, and the Ran S. escorted her partner into the depths of the hall to correct the clothes that had been unfolded all that day. Sam took it upon herself to count her out. "Thank you for helping me choose." Camille smiled. Her cheeks burned feverishly with a blush. "Thank you, Evelyn. Always happy to help update the look," she smiled back. What Camille didn't know was that Evelyn had already looked at her closely before approaching her and realized, because the girl had counted the bills several times, that the budget for the cover was quite tiny. Camille was not aware of the fact that the sundress she had chosen actually cost $250 with all the discounts. "So you owe exactly $50, the consultant said with a nonchalant look. Camille was already holding out the money, but her eyes fell on the cash register display. It showed the real price. Evelyn had hoped the girl wouldn't notice it, but Camille hesitated and looked uncomprehendingly. "It's the old price. The system knocked it down." She found it quickly. "Evelyn, that'll be $50. And seeing that the girl was slow, Evelyn herself collected the bill from her hands and also motioned to her across the counter, rustling a bag of clothes. "Take it, please, and thank you for the purchase." They exchanged a glance, and it was so quick, piercingly clear. Camille was bringing the package to herself, as if not believing in its material, tangible reality. "Thank you." And she walked out of the store. Before the girl who had performed the cashier's duties in the store that day returned to her seat, Evelyn had time to take out of her pocket the wallet that she simply did not risk ever leaving in the staff locker room of the mall, and put the missing $200 for the sold sundress into the cash register. If at those moments there was anyone who would ask her about the reason for such an act, she would not be able to clearly answer what moved her, but certainly not ordinary pity. She simply decided that it was the right thing to do. That it was the right thing to do. The thing was, it wasn't the first time Evelyn had seen Camille in this store or in town. They lived on the same street, and even their houses were close together, window to window. Evelyn was not a gossip, but if you didn't live as a recluse, you'd learn about a lot of your neighbors, and especially about the ones people said were strange. That's how you get to know them from afar, from the words of strangers. Evelyn was acquainted with Emily's grandmother and her granddaughter. Evelyn herself had been raised in a single-parent household by her grandparents. True, not because of orphanhood. Just parents were constantly on business trips or on hiking trips. In general, they lived their own separate from the native child, a rich life. But Evelyn's grandparents were quite modern people, and so for her Camille's upbringing seemed wild. But there was nothing to be done. Evelyn had been married for a long time. It was the 10th year of their marriage. It was a happy union. And in principle, her husband's income would have allowed her to be a housewife. But when son Kevin went to the 1st grade, Evelyn decided that she had enough of her recluse and got a job at this mall, especially since she'd always wanted a job that had something to do with clothes. Perhaps, Evelyn sometimes thought, it was something passed down from her grandmother, who had worked for almost 40 years. It was here in the clothing store that Evelyn had gotten the chance to get to know her grandmother and the flu, and on visits from an old lady and a teenage girl, who then turned into a young and beautiful girl. The whole store, as they call it, was painful to watch, because Emily, in her peculiar manner, now and then yanked her granddaughter. "Don't touch the tear. No, you will not wear that kind of work. And it's not made for you. Put it back. I don't spend the money, I decide what you wear." These were the phrases that accompanied their trips to the store for down jackets, seasonal, and other outerwear. The unhappy child was echoed by another salesgirl. And what will grow out of her with such a grandmother? Evelyn shook her head. She didn't know what to say. She felt guilty for some reason. They were strangers. It turned out that it was impossible to watch indifferently all these years as the grandmother grows her granddaughter, keeping her as from diapers in a cocoon of strange, frightening, giving a slight madness, care. Was this what Evelyn had done with the sundress? She suddenly realized that something special seemed to have happened in Camille's life, something immeasurably important that had motivated her to finally break the cocoon. Her grandmother said to Camille, "Let's have some tea." Back home, the girl hastily hid in her room and went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, put out tea pairs from a special ceremonial service, which in general, according to the rules, appeared on the table only on holidays, and on the calendar with magnetic bright squares. It was a very ordinary Sunday. "What's that?" The old lady frowned. "When did you make that speech?" "I didn't bake." The grandmother smiled at Camille and motioned her to the table. "I don't want you to be angry." "Okay, I decided on the weekend not to go out, not to the theater, and not to exhibitions to go to the library. I did a little work. And Camille told her mentor what she'd been doing. I just decided that soon I will finish school, and I need to get some experience, how to work. Emily sat down at the table, very distrustfully looked at the piece of cake, which her granddaughter put on her plate. Grandma, it's natural, and it's fresh, it's true. But it is not always possible only to bake cakes. Sometimes you can. And how much did you make? 100, answered Camille. How much does a cake cost? 50. Where's the rest of the money? I'm Camille. I'm starving. My high school asked me to take a photo for the prom. I just said the first thing that popped into my head. And when Granny looked up, aroused blue eyes squinting intently, Camille had no doubt in those moments. She would be exposed now. But here Emily nodded. It used to be customary for elders to be asked what to do. Oh, come on. What can I take from you? There's no work after school. Are you going to study? The old woman finally put off the dessert with a spoon and took a piece of cake to her mouth. Granddaughter held her breath. That'll do, said Emily, and did not utter another word during the tea party. And then she asked to measure her blood pressure and settled down on the sofa in front of the TV to watch a documentary about VDNK. The girl was happy that the cake was met favorably. The grandmother was simply amazed at her good attitude. After all, the last time Camille had brought her a store-bought cake to the hospital, she had thrown it out the window, screaming about how she wouldn't poison herself with palm oil. Maybe today's tea party is a sign of good things to come. Camille, housekeeper on trial, smiled at her thoughts. But then she remembered Stephen again. It seemed an eternity since that unimaginable incident at the cottage. And in all that time she had not seen Stephen. It was as if he had disappeared from her life altogether, vanished into thin air. The only thing that was certain was that he had dropped out of school after all. It was so little surprise to anyone, though. And the vice principal, not hesitating in expressions, prophesied to this bully the most terrible end, like his father. Camille did not agree with her and almost spoke out loud, but restrained herself, for it did not change anything. Who would believe her that Stephen was not really as horrible a person as everyone thought he was? Camille successfully passed her final exams, and finally, the big day of graduation arrived. Grandmother knew in advance that he would wear his granddaughter a dark blue velvet dress, which she once wore to the school graduation. Mom Camille this dress under the black silk sand, now hung on her shoulders, on the door of the platinum closet. But yesterday's schoolgirl, getting ready for her main holiday now in front of the mirror, admiring herself in a very different outfit, that sundress with marvelous lush pink flowers. For the first time, Camille had not put her hair in a braid. Instead, she had twisted it into curls from the evening before. Logic, of course, was not at home, but she used an old folk trick, and the curls turned out with the help of ordinary socks. Granddaughter, what took you so long? Are you late? Camille flinched when she heard her grandmother, but the smile remained on her face, and she felt more confident than ever. And with another glance at herself in the mirror, she walked resolutely toward the door. Emily jerked back, and if she hadn't taken her heart pills this morning, she might have had a second heart attack. Because granddaughter, how did she look? Like she's not even her own. That's her Georgian. Grandma, I love you very much. The girl intercepted the old woman's hands, gently squeezed her cold fingers, wrinkles, and hands. But I won't go to my mom in that dress. I've bought myself a paycheck. I just can't live like this anymore. Grandma, it's not right. And so they stood opposite each other, the old generation and the young, the closest people to each other, who sometimes could almost read each other's thoughts, and at the same time very different people who belonged to different worlds. But here Emily, as noted lips and chin trembled, eyes darkened, hands withdrew and sighed deeply full chest. Exhaled through her teeth, Camille hid her hands behind her back, lowered her eyes. I won't be long, Grandma. I'll just get my diploma, take a picture with the guys in the park, and go home, Grandma. She took a timid step towards the door. I'll go." "Okay, go," Emily said unexpectedly calmly. "And don't be in a hurry. It's such a young thing." "Stop." She stopped when the girl opened the door to the landing. Emily opened the soap box. It was an old ceramic box with roses on the lid. The soap that had been stored in it almost 100 years ago was also scented with roses. Now it was used to store cash, with which people used to go to the store to buy groceries, pay for light, and so on. Determinedly, the old lady emptied the box of its contents. There were about 3,000. She handed it to her granddaughter. "As I recall, we didn't have a prom date, so tell whoever you need to tell. It's not out of favor that they're there to feed and water you." "Granny, go already." The old lady interrupted her and waved her hands as if she had chased away a butterfly that had accidentally flown into the house. "Or we'll be late." Camille left. Emily returned to the hall and sank into her favorite chair. Arms settled on the windowsills. She closed her eyes. Quietly, the clock flowed from beneath the closed ones. Tears rolled down the old woman's eyelids. But it was a light sadness. It was just a sudden realization that everything had grown up. Her granddaughter, though she tried to keep her from stupidity and temptations of vices of this world. I guess people are right. It's impossible to hide it from young people. Well, it remains, then, to hope only that it will not do any harm at all, that at least a little John in her head was able to put. And then Emily dozed off. Classmates saw Camille in the update, but the main thing in unusual such a form did not immediately recognize who was in front of them. For a while the cheerfulness died down and all eyes were fixed on the one who had come. Some of the guys whistled, and many girls looked at her with envy. It turned out that this girl had a gorgeous figure, and her hair was usually hidden in tight braids. Now she had lush silk curls. Camille. Anatoly Vladimirovich, the headmaster, approached the girl. "Are you gorgeous?" He simply spread his hands. I wouldn't be lying if I said that I had never seen a more beautiful graduate in my memory. Much later, looking back on that day, Camille understood that its bright events merged in the end into one long action, like multicolored glasses in a kaleidoscope are folded into one pattern. But this was true of the day until the moment when, after a walk in the park, a familiar voice suddenly called out to her. The sun was already slanting toward sunset. Its fiery golden rays penetrated the green of the trees and still blinded. So Camille squinted, and the silhouette of the guy standing nearby turned out to be quite blurred. "Stephen disbelieving," she said. The rest of the graduates didn't even notice her slipping away. Their first impressions had time to dissipate, and they were more interested in each other's company, leaving the oddly familiar to their high school roommate. As in years past to herself, Stephen stood at the entrance to the park, again in ripped jeans. But the jacket was a new brownish red and true to size. "Congratulations," he said and smiled. "Did you drop out of school after all?" the girl said reproachfully, although when she almost ran towards him, she wanted to say something else. "Busy. I had an apartment to sell and a summer house." He glanced from top to bottom and smirked back. "You're pretty, aren't you? Well, I'll leave you to it." He nodded at the group of school children in the distance. "I don't mind," Camille replied. "I guess I don't fit in after all." "You don't have to," said Stephen. "You'll find people you feel comfortable with." It was a strange word, and a phrase for him in general. Camille squinted. "So you've decided to leave after all?" "I have to find my place somewhere." "Okay." He clearly wanted to say something else, but he faltered and retreated a step. "Good luck, Camille. I didn't get a chance to say what I wanted to say." What do they need to talk about? That he's not completely alone. That she has to understand, just has to find out how to help him and... But all these thoughts were born in her mind. She couldn't put it all out coherently right now. She could only stare at him. How she needed him to take the tiniest step towards the tiniest drop himself. But he sent her a mesmerizing stare instead. His face contorted stiffly. And he, turning around, simply rushed to run to the bus stop. A shuttle bus stopped there, And at the same time, it seemed painfully clear that he was not just rushing toward the shuttle bus, but that he was running away from it, and from the conversation that could have taken place between them. Figures of swans surrounded by live snowy white hyacinth with flecks of icy pink, and we were beautiful. And if the organizers of this wedding reception had been asked to name the most successful element of the banquet decorations imposed, she would have pointed to these ice sculptures, rhythmically nodding a mini pen on the spread of a notebook, the entries in which were such small abbreviations that only their creator was able to decipher it. The girl looked at her creation magnificently. Thanks to this order, she would finally close the mortgage for the apartment. And also, perhaps, after it I can treat myself to a vacation, in which I have not been for the last 2 years, with a satisfied sigh and a nod to her own reflection. Camille returned the writing utensils to the pocket of an immaculately modest-tailored, smoke-something gray. The jacket that made up the set with the pencil skirt, plus the silk blouse of a delicate lavender hue, was stylish but not overly dressy. After all, she is a responsible person here, and in no case should not compete with the bride or even the guests. "Guys, this way." There was a voice behind her through the open door. Camille's eyes widened. Some workers with a stepladder and some other guy in a black suit entered the room. "Over there." The guy stretched out, pointing at the wall. More precisely, on that part of it, which was located behind the seats for the young and was generously traumatized with silk and spoil, the folds of which were supported by golden Cupid figures. "Hey, what are you doing?" Resentment flooded in. "Trespassing on her domain. Girl, don't you dare touch anything here." The workers stopped and turned to their superiors, and the superiors to her security detail. Threw a tall brunette and stuck his thumbs behind the belt of his pants smirked. It came out extremely cocky. "We're working. Please do not interfere. Do not interfere," indignantly flashed Camille. "Yes, do you know how long we've been laying this down? What do you think you're doing? Why didn't I do anything?" And then she was silent, because the young man's face seemed familiar. Stephen. Apparently, the mutual recognition came to them synchronously. "Camille," he said, "what are you doing here? A wedding?" She answered simply and, in general, quite matter-of-factly. "What are you doing here?" "I'm working too," he said. "So what are we doing?" asked one of the workers. "Yes, wait, you." Stephen brushed it off and focused his attention back on the young woman in front of him. He had remembered her all these years, while he had been busy putting his life back together in a shard. And she remembered him too often, more often than he would have liked to remember a guy he knew from high school, not even a classmate. A close encounter that had taken place under less than romantic circumstances, but that had been in the past. And now they exchanged a few more phrases, and it turned out that Stephen was the head of security of David's fiance's father, a complicated man, a businessman, and even an oligarch. Stephen had spent almost all these years in other parts of the world, and then to work in a solid reputation in the security industry, decided to return to the city, which still considered the most native place. And this is where he eventually found his best job. "I never would have guessed," Camille said frankly, when Stephen told her what he was doing. "Well, of course, with my pedigree and track record," he replied. And it was not clear whether he was really offended or whether he was being kindly ironic about himself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." Camille immediately fell into confusion. "It's okay, it's so familiar. It's like all those years of separation never happened." Stephen smirked. "And you, then, are the creator of all this." He circled the space with his hand. "It's pretty, but of course, terribly girly, if you know what I mean." "Not at all." Camille had always been very sensitive to criticism of her creations. She could only speak calmly about anything and everything directly to her clients. But the rest of us would be better off holding our tongues. Camille herself often regretted her temper, but found a reason for it. Apparently, it was inherited from her grandmother's temper. And the decoration is created taking into account the tastes and wishes of the bride and groom. Our agency is oriented on the current world trends in the field of wedding fashion, said the girl. Wait a minute, you bowed your head. What, you're married and you're doing things with your husband? Do you think that's the only way to do it? Did Camille frown again? No, it just occurred to me. He scratched the back of his head in a familiar gesture. I'm not married. That's wonderful. What do you mean? Never mind. So you started an agency with someone else, and you do weddings? Mostly them. But we also do wedding anniversaries, engagements. Do you do divorces? No. Camille was in such a weird state of mind talking to Stephen that she missed the ringing of her cell phone. The girl carried 2 miniature smartphones with her. The second one contained only personal contacts, and before such a neglectful part to her professional duties was not peculiar to her. Who would ever think of celebrating a divorce? I don't know. He shrugged. I went to the sea for 2 weeks to celebrate. I just lay on the sand and matured to move on with my life. I asked about you and thought that if you like weddings so much, you should probably be married already. Maybe even more than once. Why is that? To the first impressions of the meeting, delighted surprise and even excitement, heart palpitations begin to be joined by the familiar irritation of mere déjà vu. So it's weddings. How many different ones can be played, given the opportunity and imagination? Stephen spoke in a completely serious tone, but his eyes were laughing. I'm not married and haven't been yet, Camille replied, and nervously fixed her already perfect hair. The girl now wore a bob haircut. So what do you need to do here? From the cameras lost the image of the hall. Apparently, you didn't cover it up with your fancy stuff. So put the camera somewhere else. This is a perfect angle. That's not my problem. The design's already been thought out and you can't change it. Who cares where the bows are? This is about safety. What, you're afraid of the bride being stolen? Don't worry. It's not in the script. I don't know anything. Stephen was suddenly dangerously close, literally hovering over her. With all his weight, Camille thought, inappropriately enough, that he had grown noticeably bigger or shoulders heavier. It's been 10 years, Stephen said. You haven't changed at all. Very much. The girl felt awkward, and for some reason she was sure that it was treacherous, and the blush was clearly visible, despite the tone, except Anna and powder. So what to do? One of the workers, who had a lot to do, couldn't stand it. It's scheduled for this day. Camille and Stephen backed away, just bounced off each other, as if to scare them off. The flock of birds scattered, and soon, with Camille's instruction, the textile decor was moved so as not to block the CCTV cameras. Now it's all ready, smugly said the girl, and Stephen visibly perked up. Then we can talk. Camille wanted to say that she was terribly busy, but that would be untrue. And besides, she herself wanted to talk to the man who made her heart beat. So strange. Often all these years it was still hours before the wedding reception at the bride's father's mansion, and Stephen and she had agreed to sit on the back porch of the house for a little while. It was the quietest place now. They sat down directly on the steps, the English-style garden in front of them disheveled as if wild, but in fact artificially grown. Camille talked about how, after studying 2 years at university to become a philologist, she had realized that it was absolutely none of her business. And it was. Decided to take a big risk just to make a living for a while, as it turns out, and in parallel to look for herself. In the end, it turned out that she liked to create holidays, and 5 years ago, she and Evelyn created a small agency, which by now has become one of the leading agencies in the city. Evelyn. Stephen was surprised. The one whose husband's an electrician, and they have a son, Kevin. I remember her. She always treated me differently, he added, and he averted his eyes differently than the others. I know, Camille nodded. She and I were talking about you the other day, and she told me all about how you weren't a monster at all. And when you reminded me, you thought I was a monster. He squinted as if with a grudge and invited me to the cottage. I swear, I smiled menacingly. It was the most nightmarish date of my life and mine. I'd give anything to have it any other way. I mean, what kind of idiot was I? Anyway, I should have just asked her out to the movies properly. I mean, you don't have to be afraid to say no. I see. The girl nervously sent a strand of hair behind her ear. The conversation had suddenly turned into a direction that was not the most convenient for a free conversation. How's your grandmother? Stephen asked. She's fine. I'm amazed at her age, and she's still chipper. Her health, of course, sometimes fails her, but she's strong enough for 10 people. You know, it's only recently that I've been able to understand her. I thought when I was just out of high school that I was out of a nightmare. And then I realized that she just loved me so much and thought it was to protect me. I spoke to the doctor. Grandma is seeing a psychologist, Camille explained. She agreed to see him to find out why she was having bad dreams. And then somehow he got her talking. And it's made our life together easier. Anyway, the psychologist doesn't want to scare her, but he said it's kind of an obsession. She was lucky she stopped in time. You know, I feel so guilty sometimes for leaving my grandmother alone for so long. But I got her a nurse, a very decent woman. She takes good care of her. Now Grandma doesn't need anything. The girl saw the skirt on her knees. She looked carefully at Stephen, catching his gaze. How long have you been divorced? Last year. I told you. We didn't see eye to eye. I guess I'm just not a good person. For some reason, I thought you'd changed since then, and not for the worse. So I don't think you're a bad Stephen. And your mother? She was careful. Do you know what's wrong with her? I mean, you didn't think of me finding her, Stephen replied. And it seemed that he was ready to answer frankly to this question, but only wanted to get off as soon as possible. We talked calmly, peacefully, and she apologized and told me not to show up again. She really has a whole other life. I don't belong there, but I forgave her. That's it. Camille fell silent. They just sat side by side and watched the wind move the tall, lush grasses and the flowers among them. I had completely forgotten. The Magister exclaimed menacingly. He is a solid age for a dog of a dozen, but he is fine. Stephen smirked. He actually lives here with me. He's in the enclosure now. Do you want to say hello? He stood up and gave his hand to the girl. I do. She stood up, accepting his outstretched palm. Do you want to bed? Stephen rounded his eyes. This was something he hadn't expected at all. Terms. The master will recognize me at once, and then you'll give me a personal tour of the place. Tell me, what does the security service do? I only know from the movies. You walk around and talk to someone on the radio all the time. Yes, Stephen almost answered. And if you lose, then you can take a chance and ask me out. The young man grinned. It was a very tempting offer. And whatever the outcome of the bet, he somehow had no doubt that the date would happen, and it would be very easy to turn it into an excursion. Stephen also thought about the fact that he might just have to become a really good guy now. It was necessary to become a good husband for Camille. Subscribe and click the bell.
Why are you sitting there? It's time. You know Michael won't be happy if you're late. Cindy stood up obediently. Sit or don't sit. It won't change anything. You have to go and do your duty. Michael was very good at getting girls into debt. And what was his sense of smell? He unmistakably determined that the girl is in some delicate or desperate situation, and immediately did so to finish the crush. Cindy came to the city like so many others for a better life. She didn't run away, but her grandmother, with whom she lived, was gone, and she had nothing to do there. The village didn't like her grandmother. She was a mean, angry old woman. She didn't like Cindy. She chased her all the time. If other girls bathed at the lake, Cindy had to weed something in the vegetable garden. She could only bathe in the evening. Usually, after all the work was done, Grandma would say, "Go to the lake, rinse yourself, or the laundry is often washed, it will spoil." Cindy obediently took a towel and went for a swim. The mosquitoes were chasing her in clouds, and she had to dive every now and then to keep them away. But she was happy. Her body seemed to calm down from the heat and from fatigue. Grandma was gone when Cindy turned 17. Cindy didn't shed a tear, and a week later, after collecting all the money she had in the house, which was not a small amount, she closed the house and went to town. True, the box with large earrings and ring, which grandmother wore on holidays to take with her, did not become. She hid them in the basement, let them lie. When she settled down, she would come back for them. Let the memory be. They were made of some cheap material, like silver, but obviously something else. Her grandmother would never splurge on expensive ones. Cindy was a serious girl, and you had to thank her grandmother for that. She wasn't afraid of any work, because she knew how to do everything. She was going to the city for a reason. Cindy was going to study. She calculated everything. For the first time she will have enough, and then she will find some part-time work. She will definitely find it, but everything went completely wrong. When she arrived in the city, she was literally deafened by the sounds. Everything was so big, glowing, and terribly unfamiliar. Cindy was carrying a large bag on her shoulder, but she wasn't looking where she was going. She was looking at the town. Yeah, their town wasn't even close. What was it? As she went to the center of her town, she could walk around the whole city in an hour, and here was such splendor. Young lady, why don't you look where you're going? Cindy felt at the last moment that she had impaled someone with her bag. A young man stood in front of her. He had a cup in his hand, but the coffee from the cup was dripping down his shirt. Oh, I'm sorry. Cindy wanted to apologize, but seeing the displeased look on the man's face, she went on the offensive. You're running like a madman. You saw the bag I was carrying. It was easier for you to go around, and if you don't watch your step, that's your problem. The look on his face became such that the girl couldn't stand it and laughed. All right, I'm sorry. The man suddenly smiled. My name is Liam, and I'm Cindy. Where did you come from, Cindy? I'm here. I'm on the train over there. You're going to theater school, I suppose. Cindy blushed. Why theater school? It's like there's nowhere else to study. You're not going to theater school. No. Cindy would never have admitted that that was why she had come here. But after the man's words, she realized that there were plenty of people like her in the city. Of course, she had known about it before, but now she clearly realized how naive she was, no different from the others, the same fools. Where are you going? Cindy wanted to argue again that she wasn't going anywhere, but she didn't. Looking for a room or something to rent, or something for the first time. Well, it's complicated. Do you know what the prices are around here? I know, of course, but I'm not poor. The man looked at me doubtfully. You know what? I've got someone who can help you. Shall we? And he strode off with determination. And Cindy remained standing at a loss. Where shall we go? Why shall we go? He turned around, sighed, and walked back. Why are you standing there? Come on, don't be afraid. Liam picked up her big bag and started walking again. Cindy had no choice but to follow him. Where are we going? To my aunt's. She has a big apartment and sometimes rents out rooms. Plus, she can help with work. You need a job, don't you? Very much. I'll take any job. Liam looked at her strangely and grinned. Liam's aunt turned out to be a peculiar woman. She immediately outlined Cindy's chores, gave her a reasonable price, and simply left the room. Cindy looked at Liam confusedly. Don't worry, she's all right, but she's been in the trade for many years and is very successful, so you won't see each other much. For the first few days, Cindy hardly left the house. Accustomed by her grandmother to cleanliness, she washed everything, rubbed everything, even received praise from Vanessa. "Well done. I see you like order. I'll take a little off your paycheck so you can keep cleaning." "Oh, it's no trouble at all." A few days later, Liam invited her for a walk. Cindy was so excited. It's a shame. Liam had a real crush on her. She chose the best dress she could find and even put a little mascara on her eyes, which she had bought the other day at a neighbor's store. If she had mascara before, her grandmother would have made her eat it. Liam looked at her carefully. "Wow, you're really pretty." Cindy blushed, and Liam suddenly thought that she had never been with anyone before him. The thought was absurd, of course, but he decided to ask, "Are you blushing like you've never been complimented before?" "No, I haven't. My grandmother, if she saw me talking to a guy without doing anything, she'd howl." Liam felt his palms sweating. An innocent girl in this century, how could that be? He ran his finger down Cindy's cheek. "Well, shall we go for a walk or to a cafe?" Cindy smiled. "Let's go for a walk. I haven't seen anything yet." They wandered for a long time. Liam was a real expert on the city. He seemed to know everything. The girl listened to him with her mouth open, and she realized that she had never met anyone smarter and more attractive than Liam. A week later, Liam invited her to his house. Cindy understood why, but she was sure it was the right thing to do. They would get married, and everything would be fine. She had never dreamed of such a turn. Everything was working out just as well as it could. Vanessa watched Cindy getting ready. "Where are you going? I haven't seen you studying for college. You're still dating." "Isn't that my Liam?" "Him? What's wrong with that?" "I don't know, girl. It's up to you to decide. But our Liam is no good, only trouble. Keep that in mind." "No way. You just don't know him. He's good, really." Well, happiness is real." Vanessa laughed, and Cindy decided that as soon as she got a job, she would change the apartment. She didn't like that woman. In the evening, Liam met her and took her home at once. "I'm sorry, I don't have much to offer, because my colleague's mother died. So we all contributed as much as we could, so we couldn't leave a friend in need." Cindy looked at Liam with such adoration that he even smiled. "What are you doing?" "Liam, you are like that, and don't worry, we live in the modern world. Let's go to the store and buy something tasty." Liam shook his head. "No, you don't have to. It's not nice. I'll pay you back as soon as I get my paycheck." Cindy almost shrieked with joy. He said it as if he meant that Cindy would always be there for him. "Oh, who cares what we count now?" They went into the store, picked up some delicacies and wine, and went to Liam's. Cindy looked around with interest. A typical bachelor's apartment. Cobwebs in the corners on the ceiling, a mountain of unwashed dishes delicately covered with a towel. They settled into a room where it was obvious that Liam was trying to tidy up. After the first drink, Cindy, who never drank, became hungover when Liam held out his arms to her. She stepped towards her without a second thought. In the morning, Liam woke up and didn't find Cindy around. He thought she had left and breathed a sigh of relief. She was certainly a pretty girl, and it was her first time with him, but she was completely inexperienced. Liam liked to take pleasure, not give it. The fact that she was gone meant he wouldn't have to say all those unpleasant, "Cindy, what kind of marriage?" It's not fashionable now, and nobody needs it. It's a relic of the past, weddings, rings, holidays. Or is that all they do in your village? Well, I'm sorry. This is not a village. Liam pretended to be offended and turned away. Cindy immediately hugged him. "Oh, come on, come on. I was just saying that. I'm sorry. Are you moving?" "Of course." Liam smiled contentedly. He didn't meet anyone at home. He preferred to do it on someone else's territory, so that he didn't have to clean up and take care of things. But everything was going so well here, Cindy would obey him without complaint. He already understood her character, so there would be no problems with her. Moreover, he decided to tell her that he had difficulties at work, let her get a job on her own, and run the household on her own money. Why? It will work out very well. He will rest and have fun, and at home he will have order, cleanliness, and food. And of course Cindy, who will never refuse him anything. A month later, Cindy was already working 2 jobs. She fed Liam delicious dinners, washed, ironed, and even bought him new clothes. Liam would hug her affectionately and say, "How did I live without you before? I don't understand." Cindy laughed happily. "Liam, I don't understand how I lived without you. I didn't live at all." 6 months passed and Cindy's euphoria slowly subsided. She began to look at things more soberly and realized that everything is not so rosy in her life as it seemed before. First of all, although she worked like an ox, there was no money at all, and even the money that had been hers personally was gone. It was very strange, considering that Cindy had hardly any new things, but Liam's closet had changed almost completely. Secondly, Cindy wondered if Liam was spending too much time on a job that he wasn't paid for. And thirdly, Cindy was beginning to realize that she was a complete idiot. Does Liam have this very job at all or not? She sat down on a chair in the kitchen, looked around the room, the curtains on the windows. She bought them. The pot in which the soup was boiling, she bought them too, and the soup that was boiling in the pot was hers too. The girl got up, turned off the gas. She would not cook anything. And after all, only 6 months ago, she dreamed that she would enter the study, that she would have a normal life. Cindy suddenly thought that Vanessa had not warned her in vain. Apparently, she knew her nephew well. Cindy got ready and went for a walk. The weather was nice. She'd have to stop by work and tell her she wasn't coming back. No, of course she'd leave her alone. She had to live somehow. Liam would see that she wasn't there and that nothing had been cooked but the first meal, and she would think about it. She came home in the dark. She had rehearsed her speech all the way, but Liam was not at home. It makes sense. He'd say it was another work emergency. Cindy sighed. How frustrating was that? Well, the main thing was to talk to him. Then everything would become clear. Liam came in the morning. He took something out of the refrigerator, tried not to rattle, and sat down to eat in the dark. Cindy turned on the light. Liam looked up at her. "Hi, what are you doing up?" "Liam, we need to talk." He grimaced. It was a friend of his, to whom Liam hadn't been able to repay his debt for a long time. He had lost a little, then he wanted to win back, but he had lost even more. Once again, Liam regretted that the world technologies were developing so fast. There were no cell phones before, and there was no need to always answer the phone. No home in that, was it? A good excuse, but now try not to answer, and then you can answer and end up in the hospital. "Yeah, Michael, hi." "Hi, Liam. Is it just me, or are you avoiding me?" "Michael, of course it's me." "Then I don't understand why we don't see each other very often. I think we should meet to discuss some things." Liam sighed tiredly. "Where should I go?" "You don't need to go anywhere. I'll come to you myself. I know the address." Michael disconnected. Liam wiped the sweat from his forehead. It wasn't funny anymore. He tried not to tell anyone his address at all, so that there would be a place no one would know about, and now Michael had found out everything. Liam looked longingly out the window. Hiding was not an option, Sooner or later he would have to go home, but the debt would be much bigger. Cindy had just come home from work when the doorbell rang. "Cindy, we have guests today, a colleague from work." The girl splashed her hands. "Why didn't you tell me? I would have cooked something delicious. It's fine as it is." Michael was alone, but Liam had no doubt that there were some tough guys waiting for him somewhere in the entryway. "It's cozy at your place." Michael looked at Cindy. "Liam, didn't you say you had such a beautiful wife?" Liam gritted his teeth. "It's not a wife, it's Cindy." The girl snorted resentfully and went into the kitchen. When Michael and Liam were seated at the table, she said, "Well, you two are talking, and I'm going to bed. I have to work early tomorrow." She slipped out of the door, terribly anxious to hear what they would talk about, but Liam was tense. Apparently it was his boss. Let them be there and Cindy sleep. Michael ate quietly. "And you're Cindy. She's a very decent cook, I know." Liam mumbled, not lifting his eyes from his plate. "And she works, and she must be from a decent family. She's got no one and comes from the middle of nowhere. Did you come to talk about Cindy?" Michael looked at him thoughtfully. "If you don't want to talk about Cindy, let's talk about you. I'm listening to you." "Me? Sure. I don't owe you money. You owe me money." "Michael, I'll give it to you as soon as I get it." Michael pushed the plate away. "You realize this is kindergarten. Maybe you'll have them in 10 years, when they won't be worth anything?" Liam was silent. "Liam, this girl, do you love her? Are you going to get married?" Liam couldn't help smiling. "To Cindy? What, am I sick? Why don't we want her, you country bumpkin? She cooks, cleans, buys groceries. That's all she's good for." "I wonder." Michael was tapping his fingers on the table. "Listen, Liam, you can not only pay me back, but also earn money." Liam looked at Michael in surprise. "How?" "Well, if you don't feel sorry for Cindy, are you saying that she has no family?" "No." "Michael, I don't feel sorry for her. You can have her. What do you want me to do?" They talked for a long time. Michael left after 2 o'clock. That night, Liam was very tender and gentle with Cindy. She even changed her mind about the scandal because she could see how much Liam loved her, but she still had to talk. In the evening, when she came home from work, to her surprise, she found Liam at home. He was lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling. "Liam, is something wrong?" He looked at her sadly and turned away to the wall. Cindy was frightened. She sat down next to him. "Liam, what's wrong? Tell me, come on." He sat down on the couch. "Yes, I guess we need to talk. I've been keeping it from you, but things are getting out of hand. You see, I've been out of work for 4 months now, ever since I was diagnosed. I thought treatment wouldn't take up much of my time, much less money." Liam saw the horror-filled eyes of Cindy and continued even more tragically. "At the moment there is movement towards recovery, but there is no money, and there are huge debts that people are starting to claim." He talked for a long time. Cindy only realized that money was needed, lots of money, or her loved one would die. It was only now that it all came to her. She realized how skillfully she had been swindled, having driven her colleague into debt, and not just driven, but under receipts. Though if she hadn't had them, she couldn't refuse, she would have been forced to. Cindy went out to get the girls. Michael was already waiting for them. "All right, my chicks, ready to work?" One of the girls laughed. Cindy looked at him gloomily. Michael pinched her quite contentedly. "Why are you looking at me like a beast? It's not like I'm forcing you. Just pay your debt and walk free." "Kathy is working with pleasure. She has found her vocation." Cindy looked at him angrily. "Go to hell. You'll choke someday." Michael snorted angrily. "I'd like to give you a punch that you'd remember for the rest of your life, but I can't. There's a very important man waiting for you, and your client is paying you very well, so I can leave you soon." "Well, we'll see." Cindy got into the car. She knew who Michael was talking about. She had been taken to the same client lately. It was an elderly man in a wheelchair. Cindy loved going to see him. They didn't sleep, even though that's why she was taken away for debt. They would talk, watch comedies, eat, and Cindy would just sleep it off. Charles had a son who lived abroad and couldn't come back now because he was under contract. Charles was not a poor man himself, and his son sent him good money all the time so that an old man like Charles could afford it. Cindy had started going to him a month ago. She didn't know how much the clients paid. She only got a little if they gave her something. Each of them was usually escorted to the door by a bald guy named Ethan, who took the money. Then in the morning, or when he had time, he would collect the girls. Charles met her in the hallway. "Cindy, I was afraid I hadn't made it. I can't get your boss on the phone. They've invented a newfangled connection, but they can't think of one that works well." Cindy smiled. Charles was always cursing everything modern, saying it was better before. And now there's no privacy at all. Think about it, Cindy. It used to be that a man went on vacation, went to the country, and that was it. Everyone knew that he would return on such and such a date, and no one touched anyone. But now at any moment at work will be called, and if somewhere the phone sat down, then in an hour everyone is on the ears, not a life, but a glass showcase. In some ways she agreed with him, but she liked to argue. Sometimes they spent the whole evening arguing. They met by chance. Cindy went out during the day. Once a month, when there were women's days, girls were given days off. Some went out. Some visited relatives. It was on one of those days that she met Charles. Cindy liked to think about anything extraneous and just walk. When she went somewhere far away, she would start a game, trying to get back to the center without questioning the passers-by. That day she wandered for a long time, wandered into some cottage community, and realized she was completely lost. There were no passers-by, so Cindy sighed and pulled out her cell phone. Only the phone was a nuisance. It just died. "Shit. Can I help you, sweet girl?" Cindy turned around in amazement. In the 3 years she'd worked for Michael, no one had ever called her that. Very close behind a wrought iron fence sat a man in a wheelchair. He was dressed like he was going to a ball, black suit, white shirt, bowdy. The man intercepted her gaze, smiled. "I like, to be always in uniform." A pun, of course, but at least with clothes on. Cindy smiled. The man reminded her of some fairy tale character. Not even a fairy tale character, just an ancient one. From a time where good manners were still honored. "Hello, I'm a little lost, and my phone is dead." The man smirked. "I've always said these newfangled things are unreliable. If you had a guidebook in your purse, you wouldn't be lost. My name's Charles, by the way. My name is Cindy. Why are we talking over the fence? If you're not in a hurry, I'd love to buy you a nice cup of tea, and then Sebastian can take you." Cindy didn't hesitate. She said yes. Why should she be afraid? She had been in such trouble for 3 years that it seemed she was not afraid of anything. Sebastian turned out to be a gardener, driver, and houseworker in one person. He was only a little younger than the owner, and at first he looked at Cindy disapprovingly. Then, really nothing, even drove her to the store a few times on Charles's behalf. On one of those trips he said, "I thought you were trying to rob my master?" Cindy was surprised, wanted to be offended, but then realized how it looked from the outside and simply replied, "Don't think so. Charles, almost the only person in this world who has treated me well, not as a thing, but as a person. I would never hurt him, never plot against him. That's a good thing. Master's been through a lot in this life. He wasn't always like this. Besides, the doctor said he had a chance to get back on his feet, except that he didn't want to." Cindy asked in surprise, "Why? I actually thought he was always like this." "No. Years ago he was driving a car with his family in it. He has a family. He did. He lost control of the car and went off the road. His wife was killed, he was left disabled. And the son was fine, except the guy got a massive shock. For 2 years he was observed by doctors, and then when he recovered, he blamed everything on his father and practically stopped communicating with him. Then when he grew up, he went abroad and doesn't even call him. Well, Charles also blames himself for everything, and that's how he punishes himself. He doesn't think that's punishment enough for him. You know, Cindy, before you showed up, he didn't even talk to anyone. He sat in his room. I even brought him food." Cindy was so upset. "Oh, how awful. He's so kind, so wonderful. How old is your son?" "He is now." Sebastian thought for a moment. 27 or 28. "And how long has he been separated?" "Since he was 20, when he left on vacation and never came back. He and his father had a big fight before he left. I heard Robert telling him everything. Charles tried to say something at first, but then he shut up. That's it. They haven't spoken since." "Well, you can't do that. Doesn't he understand?" "I guess not. You see, whether it's my father or Robert, they have the same character. Neither of them will ever make the first move." Cindy thought, "Oh, I wish I could talk to that Robert. Explain, but you can't. Charles would not forgive her for such an intrusion into his private life." The first time she told Charles, he'd looked at her for a long time. "So you're not doing your duty?" "Well, yes, but we have to do something." "What? Who needs me here with my claims?" "I've got no one. I'm not from around here." I don't think Michael didn't have it all figured out. She waved her hand. "I'm not a person at all now, and I'm not going to change anything." The man wanted to say something else, but didn't. But just 3 days later the order came in for the whole weekend. It wasn't bad money, but the girls were afraid of such orders. Cindy was afraid too, but judging by the glint in Michael's eyes, he was paid well, which meant he wouldn't be overplaying anything. She said goodbye to the girls just in case and got into the car with Ethan. He drove off, silent as always. What was her surprise when the car stopped in front of that very cottage? True, she was a little upset then. She had such a good impression of the owner of the house, and now it was crumbling like a house of cards, but Cindy was worried for nothing. They had dinner, then sat on the veranda, and she was sent to her own room to sleep. It was only then that Cindy realized that this nice older man had just decided to let her rest. The first thing after the bedroom door closed behind her, she burst into tears. It was so unusual to feel cared for. It was the first time she slept peacefully, ate, even went swimming in the pool, sometimes even forgetting what her life had become. And how much they talked. About everything, life, books, movies. When Charles found out that Cindy hardly knew any movies, he was very surprised. "Don't you like to watch melodramas, for example?" "All girls love them." "I don't know, I guess I do. My grandmother didn't have a TV because you have to pay extra for electricity. Liam had no time to watch. I'd come in from my second job and just fall over. And now I don't have time for movies." "Cindy, have you met Liam?" "I mean, it's all his fault. I tried. I waited for him at his house. He was with some girl. Anyway, he said he hated talking to people like me. From then on, Cindy had an occasional vacation. She was ashamed that Charles would give her that kind of money, but he wouldn't listen. Before Cindy and Ethan could drive away, a cab pulled up in front of the house. No one got out of it for a long time. Then the door opened and Lisa literally fell out of the car. She had been working at Michael's a little longer than Cindy had. The girl was badly beaten up and practically unsteady on her feet. Cindy rushed to her from the car. She looked at her friend with a distraught look in her eyes. "House 56. Never go there. It's better from the bridge." And Lisa cried. She was led into the driveway, and Cindy got back into the car. It was quite possible that she too would someday return in the same condition, or not at all. That could happen too. In the evening, Charles asked, "Are you looking a little gloomy today?" Cindy told him everything. He listened attentively, silently, his fingers drumming on the table. "Tell you what, Cindy, give me the coordinates of your Michael. You got a personal number?" "Yes. Why do you need it?" "We need it." Cindy wrote the number on a napkin. "Now, girl, why don't you go to bed?" In the morning, Cindy woke up late. Strange, why hadn't they come for her yet? Shit, Michael's gonna yell and probably give her a ticket. She'll never pay off that debt. Charles was downstairs in his chair. "Oh, you awake, Cindy?" "Yes, I'm sorry. I've got to run." "No need. Sit down. Pour yourself a cup of coffee." Cindy stopped confused, sat down, poured coffee, and only then was surprised to see that Charles had her passport in front of him. "Oh, where did you get it? Did you kill Michael?" The man laughed. "To be honest, I really wanted to, but I had to pull myself together. I paid your debt, or rather that man's debt. I was going to ask you if you don't mind if I ask him later. Does he have that debt? Paid?" Cindy was suddenly in tears. "How could you do that?" "You're the—" "Thank you." She wiped her eyes. "And you'll have to ask him. Double or triple?" "That's good." "Cindy, I'm not insisting, but I wonder if you could stay with me for a while. You need to study, and I'll be less bored." A year passed. Cindy entered the institute, but without Charles' help, she would not have passed any exams. For 3 months, he literally kept her awake. She read, she counted, she crammed. She went to the exam like a robot, and like a robot she passed. That day they had a real party. Cindy bought a cake, Sebastian cooked meat, and Charles entertained everyone with jokes. When Sebastian went home and they were sitting around a small fire, Cindy couldn't stand it. "Tell me, did you have a family?" And Charles told everything, how he loved his wife, how he loved his son, and how he had lost both him and her. "How could that be? You need to try and talk to him now. He's an adult now, an adult." "No, Cindy, that's just it. He's grown up, he's a real man, but he hasn't changed his mind, and he's never even tried to talk to me. The last time I tried was about 5 years ago, but my son didn't respond, so that's the way it is. I occasionally check in to see how he's doing. I know he's doing well, but for some reason he's not married yet." Cindy worked as hard as she could for her keep and lodging. She cleaned, cooked, made sure Charles took his medication on time. Sebastian breathed a sigh of relief. "Cindy, you have no idea what it meant to me to make pancakes. It was horrible. I spent 2 days researching each dish, and only then did I try to cook it." Cindy laughed. "I really like cooking, and I like everything very much." A year later, Charles fell ill. He caught a cold somewhere in the street, and then a complication developed. He flatly refused to go to the hospital. The doctor came to his house. Cindy looked at the face of the one who had given her hope for life and realized that she would not survive if something happened. Charles was hardly eating. Nothing pleased him, and then she made up her mind. She went to his study at night when the master of the house was asleep. She explored the contents of the drawers for a long time and finally found a notebook that contained his son's address. Not only the address, but also his phone number. It took her another day to work up the courage, and then she dialed the number. The phone was not answered for a long time. Finally, a man's voice answered. "Hello. Hello, you don't know me. My name is Cindy. I live with your father." "Is that a mistress?" "But I'm not interested. What do you want?" Cindy thought he didn't hang up right away. That was good. That's what she was afraid of. "Listen, don't hang up. I'll tell you everything." "I'll tell you everything." "It's up to you to figure out what to do. Your father, he's in a lot of pain. He tries not to show it, but I've seen him sitting in his office several times, holding your picture and crying. Did he put you up to calling me?" Cindy was scared. "No, he doesn't know. He won't forgive me for meddling where I shouldn't. I wouldn't interfere. It's just that Charles is very ill at the moment. It may not be critical, but he's lost interest in life. I'm begging you. If you would come, he might feel better." The other end of the phone laughed. "Are you afraid of losing your daddy? Do you really expect me to believe you're all that sincere?" Cindy was sick of listening to this narcissistic asshole. You know what? A man who has blackness in his soul and sees it all around him. I have nothing more to say to you. You found the culprit for your mother's death, or rather, it's very convenient for you to blame it on your father, and you live your life in peace. And your father starts the morning thinking, "I wish I hadn't survived that accident. You're a cruel man, and I'm sorry I called you." Cindy disconnected and even threw the phone. I mean, really, why would she do that? She didn't want Charles to find out. The next day, Charles got worse. There was no change in his medical condition, but his mood. The doctor took Cindy aside as he left. "Cindy, Charles needs positive emotions as much as possible. You know, moping is very dangerous in his condition." "I understand. I'll try my best." "Yes, you will. Have a good day." The doctor left, and Cindy went to her room, but just as she reached it, the doorbell rang again. She took a quick step back. The doctor must have forgotten something, opened the door, and froze. There was a man standing in front of her. He was something elusive, similar to Charles, but looked much more powerful. "Is that you?" He looked at her mockingly. "It's me, and this is you. Come in, please." She backed away, and he stepped inside, tossing a large travel bag carelessly to the floor. "Sebastian, where?" "There's stuff in the car, presents." Sebastian appeared out of the ground, looked at the man for a moment, then rushed to him. "Kid, Uncle Sebastian." They hugged. Sebastian sort of even wiped his eyes. Come, make your father happy." Robert looked at Cindy confusedly. "How? Can you do that without warning? Is it all right?" She smiled. "Let's go quickly. What warning?" She opened the door to Charles' room. "Charles, you have visitors." The man reluctantly turned his head and froze. He looked silently at Robert, who was walking slowly towards him. "Son." "Robert." Cindy tactfully closed the door and went into the kitchen. She had to prepare something tasty, something festive. She had the salad ready. She put the meat in the oven, sat down, and Robert came into the kitchen. "Something smells delicious." She smiled. "Dinner will be ready in 200. Why don't you make some tea and sandwiches in the meantime?" "That would be great." I'm starving." Cindy began to make sandwiches quickly, and Robert watched her when the girl put a plate and a mug in front of him, said, "Well, tell me, Cindy, what are you doing in my father's house? That you're here out of the goodness of your heart, I don't need to tell you. I haven't believed in human souls for a long time." Cindy shrugged her shoulders. "That's your right. Everyone believes what they want to believe. But will you tell me you're not trying to marry my father?" "Marry Charles? Are you out of your mind?" Cindy immediately recognized that Robert was very handsome, probably spoiled by women's attention, and no wonder, but the way he behaved, the things he said, just repulsed her. He was so nasty. Why, a lot of girls your age only dream of such a husband. He's got money, but well, you know. Cindy, leaning over to him, was just bursting with anger. "No, I don't understand. I don't understand the intricate plans and actions that are brewing in your sick brain. And please remember, I'm here because I'm very grateful to your father. He has helped me a lot in my life. You're a completely unreliable person, so I'll be with Charles until he kicks me out. Is that clear?" Robert looked at her in a kind of admiration. "It's clear. You just don't get to swinging your fists, or your eyes will be so glittering that you'll be impossible to handle." Cindy straightened up and walked out of the kitchen shaking. What a narcissist. What kind of a narcissist who thinks he knows everything? How could Charles, the smartest and kindest man in the world, have such a son? She looked into the room. Charles was asleep. On his lips was a smile. She smiled too and quietly closed the door. In the evening, Charles even sat at the table for a while, ate a little, which Cindy was terribly pleased about. The conversation was mostly between Robert and her father. So Cindy cleared the table, said good night to everyone, and went to bed. She had to go to the institute in the morning. She left when everyone was still asleep. The day flew by unnoticed. If earlier Cindy had been worried that Charles might need her help, now she was calm. She said goodbye to her classmates and headed toward home. "Oh, what people, Cindy?" She jerked and turned around. Lion was standing in front of her. Dan, that was someone she never wanted to see in her life. To be honest, she didn't think she ever would. The city was huge, just huge. You could live here all your life and never meet him. She turned away and wanted to leave, but Liam grabbed her arm. "Where are you going, chick? You owe me something." Cindy tried to pull her hand away. "I don't. You owe me something." "Let go." "But how can I let you go? It's not fair. You have a good life, and I have a bad one. Who picked you up? Who made you a town? You're a shitty village." Cindy yanked her arm away, and Liam let go of her, and she fell. She hit her elbow so hard that tears came out of her eyes. And at the same moment, someone picked her up and put her on her feet, and then she saw Liam's shoes fly up. Or rather, it was he who flew down, and the feet in his boots flew up. And then she saw Robert's face in front of her. "Are you okay?" "I am." "Why are you here?" "Oh, well, thanks a lot. Let's get in the car." Cindy let him drive her to the car, and when he closed the door behind her, she cried, "Oh, God, what is it?" Why couldn't she live in peace? Why does she want so much to forget the past? She did everything to never remember it. And then Liam. Now he knows where she goes to school. Cindy suddenly squeezed her eyes shut. What if he starts to scare her? What will he tell those she socializes with at the institute? About where she used to be, who she used to be? What to do? Robert got in the car, looked at her, held out a tissue, then sighed and touched off. When Cindy had calmed down a little, he asked, "Well, who was it?" "It doesn't matter." "Well, it doesn't matter. Then it doesn't matter." They drove home in silence. Already in front of the door, Cindy turned to him. "Please don't say anything to Charles. I don't want him to be nervous." "All right, if you say so." She knew that Robert was leaving in a week and decided that she just had to keep communication to a minimum. Charles was feeling much better. She lay awake all night, then decided that she should transfer to a correspondence school so she wouldn't need to be in the neighborhood much. And in the morning she got the news that made her clap her hands and scream like a little girl. At breakfast, Charles looked at her and said, "Cindy, you'll have to live here alone, but Sebastian will be around." "Why?" She looked at him fearfully. "What's wrong? Where are you going? Are you worse? You don't feel well?" Charles laughed. "If you'll let me say just a few words to your endless questions, I'll answer you." Cindy gave an embarrassed yelp and fell silent. "You see, Cindy, my son insists that I go with him. There's a clinic there that's willing to operate on me. And they even say the chances are good. Here, Robert's gonna stay for a couple weeks while I get checked out, and then we'll fly out together. Just for a couple months. I hope I'll be back on my own." Cindy couldn't take it anymore. She threw her arms around both Charles and Robert. For some reason, however, Robert kept her in his arms a little longer than he should have, which confused her. In the evening before going to bed, Cindy looked at herself in the mirror, eyes burning, a smile on her lips. No, not again. She can't, she mustn't. But the girl already realized that she had fallen in love with Robert irrevocably. She went out onto the balcony as she was in her light pajamas. Cindy always did. The balcony connected several bedrooms on the second floor. Charles lived on the first floor, so no one was in her way. She leaned on the railing, then turned her back to it, and found herself nose to nose with Robert. God, she'd completely forgotten he was on the second floor, too. Robert looked at Cindy with an admiring gaze. She should have run away, but she couldn't. Her feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. "Cindy." His voice was hoarse, as if he was short of breath. He moved closer, and the girl just closed her eyes, feeling his lips on hers. 2 weeks flew by like a day. Cindy thought that all these feelings and experiences that are shown in movies are all far-fetched, but no, she felt like 10 heroines put together. For the entire 2 weeks, she woke up in Robert's arms. She was insanely embarrassed in front of Charles, because he knew everything about her past. How would he feel about their liaison? Robert had made far-reaching plans. He talked about the fact that in 6 months his contract would be up, and he would be back. He'll come back. They'll get married right away. You'll see, it'll be great. And Daddy will dance with you at our wedding. Every time Cindy looked at Robert asleep, she promised herself that she would tell him tomorrow. But each time she put it off. She was sure that Robert would push her away in disgust, and she wanted it so badly, another day of happiness. She made it to the day of their departure, and when the bags were packed, she sat down next to Robert. "We need to talk." Robert turned to her. "Is something wrong?" Cindy didn't have time to answer. Robert's phone rang and he was speaking German, but even Cindy's knowledge of foreign languages was enough for her to realize that it was a woman calling and demanding to know when Robert would be back. Robert answered almost rudely, finally saying that he had asked her not to call. When he disconnected, Sebastian entered the room. "The carriage is here. We have to hurry. There's traffic in the city." Robert put his arm around Cindy. "I'll bring my father and we'll talk about everything, or on the phone. I promise. I'm sorry, I gotta go." He leaned into her ear. "Love you." As they drove away, Cindy felt like the most miserable person ever. She put the calendar on the table and then crossed out today. The countdown of waiting went on. 3 weeks later, she realized something was wrong with her. Only what? The hunch came suddenly. It couldn't be. She was walking out of the clinic this morning, walking and smiling like a complete idiot. The doctor said she was pregnant. The term is very small, so when she asked who was there, he laughed and said, "A baby." Nothing else is known yet. Robert's baby is in it, his and hers. It's so unexpected, so exciting. He'll be calling tonight. Cindy had no idea what his reaction would be. She was already approaching the gate when she felt someone looking at her. Cindy turned around and immediately met eyes with Liam. She felt the blood rushing in her head. He had found her and here she was. She could definitely forget about being happy now. Liam smiled crookedly and quickly disappeared behind the bushes. Cindy walked into the house. She sat down on a chair in her clothes. She sat for a long time, then stood up resolutely and took out her suitcase. Strangely enough, she had a lot of stuff. She had to take a bag too. She thought and took half of the money that had been left for the household. Now she had to write something to Charles. He was the only one she trusted enough to talk to about everything. The letter turned out to be longer than she thought it would be. She explained everything about her and Robert, nothing about the pregnancy. She left the house, found Sebastian. "Sebastian, I'm leaving." "Where are you going?" "Yes, I'm going home." The man put away the shovel he was fixing. "Cindy, what happened?" "It's a long story and I'd like to forget it." "Charles, I left a letter." "And Robert?" Cindy blushed. "What about Robert?" "Cindy, do you take everyone for an idiot? You can never hide what's been going on between you two." "I'll call him." "I don't know what you're thinking, but you're wrong. Sebastian, don't you understand? I'm not worthy of Robert. He'll forget me, marry a normal girl." "It's all wrong. He won't be happy with me anyway." Cindy hugged Sebastian, then headed for the gate. "Wait, can I at least give you a ride?" She waved. "No need, thanks. I'll do it myself." Her grandmother's house greeted her with a dank dampness. It had taken her 3 days to get here. She'd changed her route on purpose so no one could find her. Her passport had been registered where she had once lived with her parents, which was almost 150 miles away. Her grandmother took her when Cindy was very young. To be honest, she can barely remember everything, and what she does remember, she doesn't want to remember. No one in the village knew what had happened to her parents. No one would ever even try to ask her grandmother because she had a short answer for everyone. Those who didn't know would blink for a long time afterward, not understanding why they were being punished. Cindy walked around the house. "Well, Cindy, there you are, back where you hated it so much. It's all right. It's going to be all right, isn't it, my good girl?" Cindy stroked her belly. She was sure she was going to have a girl, a little sunshine, with Robert's eyes. Having melted the stove, Cindy made herself some tea and sat down at the table. Tomorrow she would devote the day to cleaning, and then she had to do something about work. It was a big village, so maybe she could find something. In the morning, Cindy cleaned up, threw away a lot of things, then saw a large dried-up rod under the door. She even smiled a little. Grandma, if Cindy did something wrong, they grabbed the rod right away. And it didn't matter at all how old she was, with what pleasure she broke it and threw it into the stove. A few days later, Cindy went to the so-called office. All village business used to be settled there. Time had passed, of course, but not so much. She wondered how long she had not been here. It was 5 years. On the one hand, it was a long time, but on the other hand, what was 5 years for a person? For an ordinary person, it was just a short period of time, but for Cindy, it was a lifetime. David? Cindy hardly remembered the name of the local boss, even waved his hands. "What's the job?" Those who have worked all their lives have nothing to pay, and you say work. Cindy was confused. What am I supposed to do? What do you do? The same thing everyone else does. Thank God they haven't canceled the buses yet. So everyone goes downtown to work. Cindy sighed. Well, I'll drive. She had to buy a new SIN card, the one she'd thrown away at the station. She found a job quickly. The salary was small, minus the road, not much at all, but it was better than nothing. Cindy hid the money she'd taken from Charles' house. Her daughter would have to buy everything. The girl checked in at the local clinic, had all the tests. Oh, honey, I don't know what to tell you. The full-figured woman doctor, who was Cindy's doctor, was going through the papers on the table. The girl tensed up. Something wrong with the baby? No, there's nothing wrong with the baby. It's you. No hemoglobin, bad blood, and a very narrow pelvis. Not only will you have to come in more often than other women, but you'll have to go to the hospital a week before delivery. Is that serious? Well, how can I put it? For some people, these problems are not problems at all, but for others, they're dangerous. I don't want to scare you for nothing. I'll say this, we'll watch you and then we'll see. Does the child have a father? Cindy smiled. Well, what about without a daddy? Children without a daddy don't exist, but we don't have one and we won't have one. I see. And another single mom. Well, go on, and we'll have another test in a week. Cindy was very worried at first, but then she calmed down. She feels great, so she's gonna be fine. She will give birth to Christina, she will love her, and they will have a real family. Cindy didn't know why. How could she be so sure it would be a daughter? She just knew, that's all. When it was time to give birth, it was March outside. There was still a lot of snow, but the sun was already cheerful. Cindy's back had been pulling since the morning. She doesn't go into the hospital until Monday, and today is still Saturday. Strange, maybe pregnant women have a reaction to the weather like old people. She decided to go out for a walk. Maybe she'd get some air and feel better. As soon as she stepped outside, a car stopped in front of the house. She froze. Her heart was pounding so hard she wanted to clutch it with her hand. Robert slowly stepped out of the car. He looked at her with a grim look that didn't bode well. Well, hello there, fugitive. Robert, how did you find me? He wanted to answer something, but he finally saw her stomach. What is that? Robert, did you run away from me with my baby? Yes, Robert, I ran away from you with my baby. He walked towards her. His look did not bode well. The closer he got, the more his heart pounded, the more his lower back ached. He came, close, stopped. Now you're going to have to answer all my questions. Cindy nodded and slowly began to settle down. The pain in her back intensified and began to develop throughout her body. Cindy, Cindy. She heard Robert's voice as if from far away. The girl felt that she was being carried somewhere, taken somewhere, then scolded for something. Somewhere in the distance a child's cry, so thin it must be her girl. Cindy tried to open her eyes, but she fell somewhere completely. Mommy, wake up. Mommy? Whose name is that? Cindy opened her eyes. An unfamiliar white room. Cindy tried to stroke her stomach, but it wasn't there. The remnants of sleep instantly faded away. Where? And she saw there was a nurse standing next to the bed. She had a small bundle in her arms, with only a small nose sticking out of it. Here's your princess. She's so pretty, but she's hungry too. Let me help you. Cindy took her daughter and froze. How pretty she was. She really was a princess. She wanted to feed her, but she felt someone looking at her. Robert was standing in the doorway. Cindy remembered everything. What would happen now? Cindy. Robert, I'll explain everything to you. She knew perfectly well that this time she could not explain anything to him, and perhaps she did not need to. Since Charles had not told him anything, perhaps she did not need to. Let it be her secret. Cindy looked at Robert with the eyes of a beaten dog. Tears sprang from her eyes. He rushed to her. Don't cry, you can't cry. Everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be all right now. Robert picked her up from the hospital. He made a mess with all the flowers and balloons. They'd never seen anything like it in the village. When they got home, Cindy saw not only the crib she'd bought from an ad, but lots of beautiful things for her daughter. In the evening, Robert took her hands in his. Cindy, when will Christina be ready for the road? Cindy was frightened. If she had a chance here, it would become quite small in the city. Oh, Robert, she's just a baby. Maybe in a few months. Months? But that's so long I have to work. A week later, Robert left and said he'd be back in 2 or 3 weeks. He couldn't come any sooner. I've got to tell my dad. You know, he's walking now, but with a cane. He is. I'm so happy for him. You have no idea. He's gonna be so happy. I didn't tell them anything. He left and Cindy felt so sad. When Christina was a month old, they went to the clinic. It was possible, of course, to wait for the doctor at home, but she was so fed up with the unloved village that she could not tell. After the checkup, when Cindy decided to walk through the market, she suddenly stopped like a stumbling block. Cindy thought she saw Liam in the crowd. She took off her seat and with a quick step went to where the familiar face had flashed, but found no one else like him. The young woman exhaled. No, it couldn't be. Where would Liam come from? If only for her soul, but the address. And then Cindy remembered that she had once mentioned her town in conversation. If it was him, what did he want? Cindy walked through the market one more time. Christina was starting to get cranky, and the woman headed for the cab stand. Robert had left her enough money to get around comfortably. Before getting into the car, she looked around once more. No, she was definitely imagining things. Why had I come all the way out here? At home she fed and tucked Christina in and went out into the yard. It had been over 2 weeks since Robert had left. They'd called yesterday, and he'd said he'd be here today or tomorrow. Cindy couldn't make sense of herself. Was she happy? Yes, very. But what lay ahead? That she didn't know. Living and lying to Robert? He had said last time that as soon as Christina could be moved, they would get married right away. She would finally be his wife. Cindy decided to weed with the flowers, the only decoration in the yard. The door to the house was open, so if Christina woke up, she would hear right away. Hello, Cindy. She flinched and turned around. Liam was standing in the yard. What are you doing here? What do you want? How did you find me? Liam smirked. But it's not that hard. Let's go inside, darling. I missed you madly. Cindy stood up opposite him. We're not going to any house. Leave me alone at last. Your debt is paid. What do you want from me anyway? Liam grabbed her arm and dragged her into the house. Cindy tried to break free, but remained silent, afraid of scaring her daughter. Liam threw her on the couch, sat down himself across from her. I have debts to pay, but I have debts to pay. And you can help me pay them off. You're crazy. I'll go to the police. Though, then I guess your Robert will find out about everything. You know Michael has lots of pictures of you and testimonials from satisfied customers too. Liam, leave me alone. What makes you think I have to pay your debts at all? Liam laughed, stood up and headed towards the crib. Cindy quickly tore off the couch and stood between him and the crib. "I don't have any money. I'm telling you the truth." "You don't, but yours, Robert, very much does. It's not mine." "Cindy." Liam sighed. "You see, you're my last hope. I won't give up. I have nothing to lose, and if I don't have the money in a week, I'll tell your Robert everything." "Don't wait a week. I'm listening to you." They turned around and Robert was standing on the doorstep. He motioned to Liam. He tried to jump out the door, but he didn't have time. Robert caught him and punched him in the face. "What are you doing here? And why does Cindy have to give you the money?" Liam tried to get away again, but immediately received another blow. "Your Cindy is a call girl. She's been a call girl for a long time." "Oh, you bastard." Robert punched Liam again, and Cindy quietly settled down on the couch. That was it. The phantom happiness was over before it had even begun. Tears streamed from her eyes. 10 minutes later, a car roared to life. Apparently Liam had left. Robert came back, sat down on a chair, and approached her. "Is it true?" "Robert, I've been meaning to tell you everything, but I kept being afraid you wouldn't want to." "You're right, I won't." "You're crap. You're such an asshole. Am I gonna take my daughter away from you? Or maybe my daughter isn't mine either? And you just don't know who her daddy is." Cindy stood up, proudly raising her head. "You'd better think she's not yours. It'll be easier on everyone." Robert stood up, gave her a long look, and walked out of the house, and Cindy collapsed on the couch and sobbed. It was 200 hours later when she went outside. There were big bags on the porch, diapers, clothes, cereal. She cried again. God, why is she like this? A few months passed. In the evening, Cindy was counting the money she had. The money that Robert had once given her had recently run out. She had been very frugal. She had bought nothing for herself, only the cheapest food. Now she would have to make do with her allowance, which she had been saving. The woman put the money aside. A month ago she had to buy a car of firewood. It hit her budget very hard, but she has a child in the house and no option to heat economically. For 3 months she will definitely have enough. But then what? She didn't know yet. There was a knock at the door. Cindy flinched. It was evening outside, raining. Who could it have brought to her? Cindy looked out the window. She couldn't see anything. Everything was flooded. The windows were fogged up. She felt creepy for some reason. She went to the door. Who's there? Cindy, open up. It's Charles. The woman quickly unhooked the door and threw herself on the neck of her past savior. Where did you come from? How? I'm here to meet my granddaughter. I barely got the address from Robert. What happened? Cindy sighed. What was bound to happen someday? Robert found out about everything. Well, what did he find out? Did you tell him what happened? No, I didn't have time. He's gone. Who cares what happened? It happened. So you're okay with it? Of course. I won't even try. I'll raise my daughter. She'll grow up a little. We'll move to the city. I'll put her in a kindergarten, and I'll get a job myself. The man looked at her carefully, then shook his head. Show me your granddaughter. Charles insisted that she go to the city with him. If you don't want to live in our house, I'll buy you an apartment. Why are you sitting here alone? A child should grow up in civilization. But Robert's not here. He's gone to his home country. Angry as hell. He doesn't talk to anyone and hardly calls me. But why do I bring everyone nothing but misery? Come on, don't beat yourself up. It's just the way life is, and there's nothing we can do about it. 3 days later they left. Charles, as promised, bought her a 2-room apartment nearby, and he visited her often. Christina loved her grandfather. Cindy was finally able to finish her studies and even get a job. The daughter was 4 years old when Charles caught a cold. At first, it was just a cold, to which he paid no attention, and as it turned out, for nothing. The illness progressed, and within a week he was sick. Cindy and Christina moved in with him. Cindy had to take a vacation because he didn't want anyone else in the house. "Charles, we have to eat." "Cindy, but I don't want to, really." "Tell me, did Robert show up?" "No, of course not." "What do you think?" Cindy looked at him in surprise. "What do I think?" "I don't understand you." "Cindy, I'll be gone, and you'll be alone in the world again. Hasn't there been a good man by your side all this time?" Cindy smiled. "No, I haven't. I don't understand. Have you decided to marry me off?" "I have, and as soon as possible." "I don't think I'm going to make it this time." "What are you talking about? Don't you dare even think of such a thing." By evening, Charles was worse, and the doctor insisted on hospitalization. Cindy went with him, and with Christina remained faithful Sebastian, with whom the girl was also very friendly. Cindy sat in the corridor while the doctor examined Charles, then he came out to her. "Why didn't you come sooner?" The doctor was about 40, a very handsome man with a calm look. You don't know how hard it was to get Charles to go to the hospital. He wouldn't go now. He was just so sick he couldn't argue. "My name is Jacob." Seeing the mute question in Cindy's eyes, he smiled. "Just Jacob for you." Unfortunately, people like that are not uncommon. They're afraid to cause a lot of trouble, but they cause even more. "Excuse me, can I buy you a coffee and we can talk?" "Yes, of course, I'd appreciate it." They were in the doctor's office. He made coffee, put the cup in front of Cindy. "What can I say?" "Of course it's very bad, considering that Charles has had many operations in his life, and his body is very worn out. It's nothing critical. I mean, we'll fight. We'll get it out, but there may be complications, but it's too early to tell." "Thank you. I'm very worried. This man is very important to us." "To us? Are you married?" The doctor seemed upset, but Cindy smiled. "No, we are me and my daughter." "You have a daughter?" "Yes, Christina. She's about to be 5. She's probably as beautiful as you are, isn't she?" Cindy was embarrassed. "Not at all, much better than me." Jacob laughed. "You're a real mother. Only with real mothers, their child is unequivocally better." They talked for another half hour. Cindy was so at ease, and Jacob suddenly said, "Cindy, I don't even know how to say this properly. In general, I would like to invite you, for example, to a restaurant or maybe somewhere where your girl would be interested too." She smiled. A nice man, of course, older than she was, but that was such a small thing. Maybe Charles is right? Stop waiting for Robert, who doesn't care about them. I'll think about it. Only if later, when Charles is feeling better. No problem, I'll wait. Besides, I have an incentive now to get him back on his feet as soon as possible. They said goodbye warmly. "Tell me, what time can I come tomorrow?" "Right after lunch, with a lot of tests and procedures before lunch." "Okay, thank you very much." She left and Jacob stood pensive for a long time. The family must be very wealthy. I wonder who she is to this Charles. A daughter? Doesn't seem like it, but they must have something in common, so it makes sense. The thing is, Jacob always wanted the good life. He was a good doctor, though, and he loved his job. He didn't want to lead anyone astray. He just thought that if he was to connect his life with someone, it should be with someone who would be of some use besides love. Cindy seemed to be just the person he needed. He would have to get her interested, but in the meantime he would treat the man she had come with. After a few days, Charles got better. So much so that he asked Cindy to bring him some cutlets. Cindy looked at him in surprise. Cutlets? That's right. I don't know why I wanted cutlets so badly. Jacob, who was also in the room, laughed. Well, now I see it's on the mend. So, Cindy, you must keep your promise. He left the room and Charles looked at Cindy. What promise, if it's no secret? Cindy waved it away. Jacob asked me to go to a restaurant, and I said I'd think about it when you were better. Charles hesitated. Why, that wouldn't be such a bad idea. There was something about the doctor he didn't like, and he couldn't say what it was, but he was a grown man, an established man, not a bad match for Cindy. But there was an unpleasant feeling in his soul. And Cindy and Jacob were really developing a romance. Cindy couldn't say she liked the doctor very much as a man, but he wasn't disgusting either. He was smart, very versatile, and he was good with Christina. Charles had already checked out when Cindy came to see him. She and Jacob had been dating for a month and a half, and today he proposed to her. Cindy was confused. She didn't think it would be that quick. Charles immediately saw that Cindy was worried about something. Cindy, what's wrong and why are you alone? I came to talk. Jacob proposed to me. Charles felt a twinge in his heart. I said I'd think about it. A month and a half is not a long time. Cindy, how do you feel about him? How do you feel about him? I don't know. He doesn't disgust me, he's interesting. Cindy grinned. Of course it's nothing like it is with Robert. Charles looked at her carefully. Are you still in love with Robert? She looked at him in surprise. Why is it possible to fall out of love with someone? There was silence for a few minutes. Then Charles said, Yes, Cindy, you have to weigh everything. Loving one person and living with another is very hard. She left and Charles picked up the phone. He didn't want to interfere in the relationship between Robert and Cindy, especially since the latter didn't want to hear anything about her. But now he decided that he would try. Robert hung up the phone. He had immediately interrupted his father when he talked about Cindy. But the fact that she had been proposed to and would probably accept it left a residue on his soul. He took the picture from the table, and no one here knew anything about her. So the little portrait of Cindy always stood on his desk, and also Christina's. His father, though Robert had never asked for it, sent pictures of her from time to time. Robert knew Dad had bought her an apartment, knew he was helping his granddaughter, so he sent him money. He didn't say it was for Christina, but Charles understood it all himself. The older Christina got, the more she looked like Robert. He saw it perfectly well. He looked at her pictures for a long time, but he couldn't help it. There was a very strong resentment against his father. Why hadn't he told him right away? Shit. He got up from the table and walked over to the window. He stared out at the street for a while, then pulled out his cell phone. Dad, can you tell me how and what? Why did Cindy do it? Of course I'll tell you everything. I should have done it a long time ago, but you didn't want to hear it. They talked for over an hour. When Robert hung up the phone, he felt worse. Shit, so what? Did it get better? No, definitely not, because he now realized that he behaved, to put it mildly, in a bad way. Cindy, it was her fault too. She should have told him everything at once too. Would he have been with her then? Probably not. But then there wouldn't have been all this. There wouldn't have been Christina. There wouldn't have been those very happy days. All in all, Robert was completely confused, so he knew he had to go home, look Cindy in the eye, and then decide what to do. Some nasty inner voice squeaked. Who needs you after all these years? Cindy's doing the right thing. She would get married and live a normal life, not wait for the weather. Robert tried to muffle that voice, opened the door, asked the secretary to come in. "Emma, I have to go to America. Any questions are for the deputy. I'm to be called as a last resort." "Okay, I'm sorry. Is there a problem with your father?" "No, he's fine. Thank you." He noticed a shadow on the secretary's face, and suddenly he remembered that this nice woman had been very concerned about his father's health when he was here for surgery, had even visited him in the hospital a few times, and then they had left. Robert vividly remembered how glum his father had been the day he'd left, but Robert had attributed his mood to the fact that Sebastian had reported Cindy's disappearance. What if that wasn't the case at all? Could it be that father and Emma? Damn, but why can't he ever see beyond his own nose? Cindy and Jacob sat in the cafe. She has to give an answer tonight. Cindy has been up all night, she kept thinking. Jacob is good, reliable. What more could a woman want? Everything seems fine, but Jacob, I realize you're waiting for an answer. Cindy, why don't we have dinner first? She smiled. Christina was at Charles, and it was safe to rest. Cindy knew that Charles would tuck the girl in, read her a story, and they would probably watch cartoons on TV while her mom was away. Cindy forbade watching cartoons before bedtime, but the grandfather spoiled his granddaughter. They ate dinner, and Cindy realized the hour had come. Jacob, I'm going to be honest with you. I've given your proposal a lot of thought, and I can tell you now, I couldn't marry you. I have been in love with another man for many years, and I would hate to lie to you. Jacob sighed. You know, I expected that answer. It was clear to me that when we're together, you're not really with me. So you're not resentful. Cindy was glad. She didn't want to offend Jacob. I'm offended, but not offended enough not to suggest that you stay friends. While the flight lasted, Robert thought about his life. At the time when he met Cindy, he had a girlfriend, and admittedly, he was even going to get married, but not until he met Cindy. It was only then that he realized what true love meant. The parting was hard. The girl was the daughter of his boss. What does he have in the end? Nothing. After he left Cindy, he couldn't think of any other relationship. He'd had women, of course, but they were just for one day. He took a cab and went home. He wondered if Cindy was at her father's, how would their meeting happen? There was no Cindy, but there was his father who said glumly, "You must be late. They're at the restaurant, and Cindy will give him an answer tonight." How? Right. What did you want? He's a decent man, not the wind in the field like some people. Daddy? Daddy what? Cindy should have gotten married a long time ago, and she's been waiting for you, you fool. What restaurant are they at? The Wave, I think. Where are you going? I'm going that way. I won't let her say yes. Cindy and Jacob went outside. Do you need a ride? No, I don't need a ride. I'll walk. Cindy, it's late, but the weather's nice. Cindy. A shout literally tore through the evening air. They turned and saw Robert running towards them. Cindy felt her legs go cotton. Jacob looked at her pale face in surprise. Is that him? Yes. Robert ran up angrily, looked at Jacob, then shifted his gaze to Cindy. Cindy, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm an idiot. I'll be sure to beg your forgiveness. But now you must tell this man that you will not marry him, because otherwise I will not vouch for myself. Jacob's eyebrows flew upward, but he found the strength to laugh. Calm down, young man. Cindy has already turned me down, apparently because of you. 2 months later, Robert finally moved back home. He was going to start his own business, but now he had other things to worry about. Dad, are you okay? Charles laughed. I'm fine. You look like an opera singer." "Dad, it's not funny. I don't know why Cindy likes tuxedos so much. Why don't you change?" Charles waved me off. "I've got time. It's 2 hours till the signing. I'd hurry up if I were you. We're going to have a guest any minute. A man has kindly agreed to fly to our wedding, or rather, a guest. What's it got to do with me? They're your guests. Not exactly. My assistant Emma's coming to my wedding. Remember her? Was it his imagination, or did his father turn pale?" The doorbell rang and Charles almost ran into the room. Appeared in front of Robert and Emma 20 minutes later in full parade. The wedding ceremony was being held in the best restaurant in town. When Robert saw Cindy walking toward him and leading the little princess by the hand, his breath caught. How good his girls are! They are the most beautiful. How happy is he that Cindy has found the strength to forgive him. And Christina is the most wonderful child in the world. They walked over. Robert kissed his bride tenderly, and Christina was picked up in his arms. Cindy looked around as if searching for someone. "Robert, where's Charles? If he's not here, there's no ceremony. You know what he means to us." He knew. Gently he turned Cindy around and pointed somewhere. There in a corner sat Charles and Emma. They were chatting, and Emma's hands were resting in Charles. It seemed like they were alone here, and there wasn't a crowd of dressed-up guests. Cindy smiled. "Isn't that Emma by any chance?" "Emma, how do you know?" "He called out for her when he was delirious with fever, but he wouldn't tell me who it was." Charles and Emma even had to be called so the ceremony could begin. "It's been a year. Cindy, you coming soon?" "Yes, Robert. The trial's over. I'll be there soon." "How did it go?" "It was great. Michael and Liam got a good settlement. I'll tell you all about it when I get there. By the way, I have more news for you." Robert smiled. Cindy spent a year trying to find the girls who had worked for Michael out of choice. There were a lot of girls. Liam often figured in their path too. By all means, she decided to punish them. Robert helped in any way he could. Today was the last trial. He lit the candles on the table, looked around the room. By the glass in the hall stood a small box, and in it, of marvelous beauty, a bracelet. Cindy was preparing a surprise for him. Only he already knew what that surprise was and had thoroughly prepared for it. This morning, he happened to see the test in the bathroom, and it had a clear 2 stripes on it. The door slammed open and Cindy appeared on the kitchen doorstep. She gave the table a surprised look, then looked at Robert. "Are we having some kind of celebration?" She looked at her husband suspiciously, trying to remember what she might have forgotten. "Of course, I hope you'll give me a son this time." Cindy sighed frustratedly. "You know everything, don't you?" He picked her up in his arms, "And I know everything, everything, everything. And I also know that I love you very much, more than life." The woman laughed, hugged her husband. "You don't know everything." Robert looked at her anxiously. "Tell me. We're going to have twins." He gently set Cindy on the floor and exhaled completely dumbfounded. "Really?" "That's it." Cindy laughed and hugged her husband gently